Hi everyone, we are Nightmare Narratives and we are here to help you today. I know you will use this video to fall asleep before, so like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. It started out subtly like most disturbing things do. I had been living in the house for nearly a year when I first heard it. At the time, I chalked it up to the house settling, or perhaps a draft sneaking through one of the old wooden windows. The house was, after all, a century old, and with age came peculiar noises. The first night, I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I thought I heard a faint, rhythmic sound. At first, I couldn't quite place it. It was soft and intermittent, like a distant rustling. I sat up, straining to listen, but it stopped as quickly as it had started. Dismissing it as my imagination playing tricks on me, I sank back into my pillows and drifted off to sleep. The next few nights passed without incident. I didn't think much of it until one evening, when I was watching a movie on the couch, the volume low to match the sleepy atmosphere of the house. That's when I heard it again, faint but unmistakable. This time it sounded closer. It was a slow, deliberate noise like someone exhaling. I muted the TV, suddenly alert. The noise was still there. Low, heavy breathing. It wasn't coming from inside the room, though. It was above me. My stomach clenched. I stared up at the ceiling, the realization sinking in. The sound was coming from the attic. I lived alone, and the attic was a space I barely used, mostly filled with forgotten boxes and old furniture left behind by the previous owner. I never felt the need to go up there, especially not at night. But now, the possibility that someone or something was up there sent a chill down my spine. I told myself it was probably just an animal that had gotten in, maybe a raccoon or a squirrel. That made sense. The house was old, and I'd seen gaps near the roof where creatures could easily slip inside. Breathing. It had to be an animal. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, trying to steady my trembling hands. I approached the attic hatch with cautious steps, the wooden ladder creaking as I pulled it down. As the hatch lowered, a rush of cold air spilled down, colder than I expected for a summer night. I stood at the base of the ladder, flashlight in hand, staring up into the darkness. The breathing stopped. I waited for a moment, frozen, listening intently. The only sound now was my own heartbeat, loud and uneven in my ears. After a few minutes of nothing, I convinced myself it was all in my head. The attic was probably too cold for whatever animal had snuck in, and it had left. Sighing in relief, I turned off the flashlight and climbed back down. But the next night, it happened again. This time, the breathing was louder. I was lying in bed when I heard it, a slow, labored inhale, followed by a drawn-out exhale. My blood turned to ice as I realized that it didn't sound like an animal. It sounded human. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in bed, clutching the covers, listening to the breathing above me. It wasn't constant. It would fade in and out, sometimes stopping altogether for long stretches before starting up again. But every time it returned, it was as though it was deliberate, like it was waiting for me to notice. By morning, I was a wreck. My eyes were bloodshot, my nerves frayed. I debated calling someone an exterminator or maybe even the police, but what would I say? I think there's a person breathing in my attic. They'd think I was crazy, and maybe I was imagining the whole thing, a product of stress and sleep deprivation. That day, I avoided the attic. I avoided the house altogether, staying out longer than usual, filling my time with meaningless errands, anything to keep me from going home. But as the sun began to set, I knew I couldn't stay away forever. I returned that evening with a plan. I was going to confront whatever was up there. Animal or intruder, it didn't matter. I needed to know. So, I prepared myself. I grabbed the kitchen knife for protection, and with the same flashlight from the night before, I headed toward the attic hatch again. The house was eerily silent as I approached, save for the sound of my own footsteps on the hardwood floor. I took a deep breath and pulled down the attic ladder. The cold air rushed out again, just like before, and I climbed the ladder slowly, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. When I reached the top, I shone the light into the corners of the attic, scanning every inch of the space. The boxes and furniture cast long, ominous shadows, but there was nothing unusual in sight. I stepped forward cautiously, my breath fogging in the sudden cold. That's when I heard it again. This time, it was unmistakably close. A low, ragged inhalation, followed by a wheezing exhale. My heart pounded in my chest as I swung the flashlight toward the source of the sound. Nothing, just empty space. But the breathing continued. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled backward, my mind racing. It was right there, right in front of me, and yet I couldn't see anything. I could feel the presence, though. It was as if the very air around me was suffocating, thick and oppressive. I bolted down the ladder, slamming the hatch shut behind me. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the knife. I locked myself in my bedroom, my back pressed against the door, listening intently. The breathing didn't follow me. It stayed in the attic, but it was louder now, as though whatever was up there knew I had heard it, and it wanted me to know it wasn't going away. I didn't sleep that night, nor the night after. The breathing continued, growing more frequent, more insistent. Whatever was up there didn't just want to be heard, it wanted to be found. The next few days passed in a haze of paranoia. Every time I entered the house, I was acutely aware of the attic, like a looming presence just above my head. The breathing had become more than just a late-night disturbance. It was an ever-present weight pressing down on me, suffocating me in my own home. The house, which had once been a place of comfort and solitude, now felt like a trap, a prison with an invisible captor lurking above. I tried to go about my normal routine. In the daylight, it was easier to convince myself that the sounds were in my head. But as the hours crept toward evening, the dread returned. The worst part was the anticipation, the knowing that once night fell, the breathing would start again. I called a few people in the hopes that someone might have an explanation. I spoke to an exterminator, explaining that I thought there might be animals in the attic. He came out, inspected the place, and found nothing. No droppings, no nests, he said, looking at me with slight concern. Doesn't look like anything's living up there. You sure it's not the wind? I wasn't sure of anything anymore. That evening, I sat in the living room, forcing myself to watch TV, to distract myself from the growing anxiety gnawing at my insides. The minutes dragged by, and I found myself glancing at the ceiling more and more often, as if waiting for it to begin. And then, just as I feared, the breathing started again. This time, it was immediate. It didn't creep in like it had before. It was sudden and loud, as if whatever was up there was closer now. The sound echoed through the ceiling, and it felt like it was directly above me. I muted the TV, frozen in place, straining to listen. The breathing was slow and steady. Inhale, exhale, like someone lying in bed completely at ease. But it was unnervingly heavy, as though it took effort. The worst part was how human it sounded. I stood up from the couch, trying to decide what to do. I couldn't keep living like this, but I couldn't bring myself to go back up there. Not again. My mind raced with possibilities. Could someone be living in the attic without my knowledge? Hiding up there during the day, waiting for night to make their presence known? But how would they get in and out? I had only one entrance to the attic, and I had checked the windows. They were all sealed. I grabbed my phone, debating whether to call the police. But what would I say? They'd come out, look around, find nothing, and leave. Just like the exterminator. The thought of being dismissed again filled me with frustration. The breathing continued, slow and deliberate. This time it felt like a taunt, daring me to come up and investigate again. But I couldn't. Not after what happened the last time. Instead, I stayed rooted to the spot, gripping my phone tightly, trying to think of a rational explanation. Suddenly, there was a new sound, a soft thump, like something being dropped onto the floor. The breath faltered for a moment, as though the person, or thing, had shifted. I felt my stomach twist. It was moving. I bolted for the bedroom, slamming the door behind me and locking it. I pressed my ear against the door, listening for any signs of movement. The breathing continued, but it seemed further away now, as if it had retreated back into the depths of the attic. But the thumping sound lingered in my mind, sending waves of terror through me. Something had changed up there. I could feel it. I barely slept that night. I lay awake, listening to every creak, every breath that echoed through the ceiling. By the time the sun came up, I was exhausted and jittery, my nerves frayed to the point of breaking. I knew I couldn't keep this up. Something had to be done. I needed help, but not from an exterminator or the police. I needed someone who wouldn't think I was crazy. That afternoon, I called my friend Derek. He was the kind of guy who liked to fix things, a problem solver who wasn't easily spooked. If anyone could figure out what was going on, it would be him. I hesitated for a moment before dialing, embarrassed by how ridiculous my story sounded, but I was desperate. I needed someone else to hear it. "Hey man," Derek's voice crackled through the phone. "What's up?" I took a deep breath and launched into the story, starting with the first night I'd heard the breathing. I left out the part about how terrified I was, focusing instead on the strange noises and the cold air coming from the attic. Derek listened quietly, occasionally making noises of acknowledgement, but not interrupting. When I finished, there was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "So, you're saying there's breathing coming from your attic?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Yes," I replied, bracing myself for the inevitable skepticism. "You checked it out, though? Went up there with a flashlight?" "Yeah, twice. There's nothing up there." Another pause. "Well, sounds like you've got some kind of problem," Derek said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "I can come by tomorrow night. Take a look if you want. Might be something you missed." Relief washed over me. Derek didn't think I was crazy. He didn't blow me off like I feared he would. "Thanks, man," I said, grateful. "I'd really appreciate it." "No problem. We'll figure it out," he replied confidently. "It's probably just something small, something explainable." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But deep down, I knew there was something more to this. Something that couldn't be explained by a simple fix. That night, I waited for the breathing to start again. I wasn't sure if I wanted it to happen, just so Derek could hear it, or if I hoped it would stop entirely, vanishing into the recesses of my mind like a bad dream. But as the hours crept by, the sound never came. The attic was silent. I waited and waited, staring up at the ceiling in anticipation, but nothing happened. It was as though the presence had sensed my plan, retreating back into the shadows where it could bide its time. I didn't know what was worse, the persistent breathing that had kept me on edge for days, or this sudden, eerie silence. Derek arrived the next evening, a toolbox slung over his shoulder and a flashlight in hand. He greeted me with a casual grin, but I could see the curiosity in his eyes. The kind of curiosity that comes from thinking you've been called in to solve something trivial, yet still holds the potential for something strange and unexplainable. "All right, show me this spooky attic," he said, glancing up at the ceiling as he stepped inside. I led him down the hall to the small door that led to the attic stairs. The space already felt heavier, the silence more oppressive than usual. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what we would do next. I opened the attic door slowly, the hinges squeaking in protest. The familiar chill rushed out to greet us, and Derek gave me a look. "Cold, huh?" "Yeah, it's always like that," I replied, my voice lower than usual. He nodded and stepped up the stairs, his flashlight beams sweeping over the dusty wooden steps. I followed closely behind, my heart racing despite the fact that I wasn't alone this time. Even with Derek's presence, the attic felt wrong, like we were intruding somewhere we weren't supposed to be. At the top of the stairs, Derek paused, sweeping the flashlight around the empty space. Dust particles floated lazily in the beam of light, and the old wooden beams creaked slightly as we moved. Nothing looked out of place, just the same old forgotten storage boxes and random junk that had been up here for years. He stepped forward, inspecting the corners and the beams, tapping his fingers along the walls and muttering to himself. No signs of animals. No water damage or mold. "It's dry." I watched him work, trying to steady my nerves. I wanted so badly for him to find something, anything that could explain the sounds. But the more he searched, the more my gut twisted. The attic looked just as empty and abandoned as it always had. After what felt like an eternity, Derek stopped, hands on his hips, and turned to me. "Dude, there's nothing here." I swallowed hard. "What about the breathing? The noise? You heard me on the phone." Derek frowned. clearly trying to reconcile my story with the empty room in front of us. He walked over to one of the storage boxes, lifting the lid and rummaging through it for a moment. Old clothes, decorations, nothing weird here. The silence hung thick in the air, broken only by Derek's footsteps as he paced around the attic. I kept glancing at the farthest corner, the one that seemed darker than the rest. The one where I had felt the coldest spot during my last trip up here. Maybe it was a draft, Derek suggested, though his voice lacked the usual confidence. He approached the corner and crouched down, examining the floorboards. Sometimes air pressure in old houses can make weird noises, especially if the walls shift with the weather. As he spoke, he pried open one of the floorboards, revealing a small gap beneath. There's some space here. Could be air moving through. I nodded, though I wasn't convinced. The breathing hadn't sounded like a draft. It had been rhythmic, deliberate, and worse, it had felt close, too close for comfort. Derek stood up and brushed his hands off. Well, if it happens again, I'd suggest calling a professional. Maybe there's something structural going on that's causing the sounds. He gave me a reassuring pat on the back. But don't worry, man. It's nothing dangerous. Just weird acoustics. I tried to smile, but my stomach churned with unease. Thanks for coming by. I appreciate it. No problem. Call me if it starts up again, Derek said as he headed back down the stairs. And if you start hearing voices, then we've got a real problem. He chuckled, but the joke fell flat. I watched him leave, the door clicking shut behind him, and once again, I was alone. The house felt even quieter after he left. The attic door loomed at the end of the hallway, a constant reminder of the unresolved presence that still clung to the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had missed something, that whatever was up there had simply hidden itself, waiting for us to leave so it could resume its unnerving activity. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, dreading the moment the breathing would start again. Hours passed, and with each passing minute, the tension built. The silence pressed down on me, suffocating in its stillness. I could feel my pulse in my throat, each beat echoing in the quiet room. And then, just when I thought I might actually get some sleep, the breathing returned. But this time it was different. It wasn't coming from the attic. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing as the sound grew louder. The rhythmic inhale and exhale, slow and deliberate, filled the room. It was close, so close that I could almost feel it. I didn't dare move. My eyes darted to the corner of the room, where shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long. The breathing continued, deep and raspy, as though someone or something was standing right there, watching me. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the pipes or the wind. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. I wasn't alone. I lay there for what felt like hours, my heart pounding in my chest, too terrified to even reach for my phone. The breathing never stopped. It stayed steady, unnervingly calm, as if whatever was in the room with me had all the time in the world. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the breathing stopped. The room fell into an eerie silence once again, and I finally let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. But even though the sound was gone, the feeling lingered. That suffocating sensation of being watched, of something lurking just beyond my field of vision. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. By the time the sun came up, I had made up my mind. I had to leave. Something was wrong in this house, something beyond my comprehension, and I wasn't going to stick around to find out what it was. But as I packed my bags, preparing to flee, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Whatever had been in the attic, whatever had been in my room, wasn't finished with me yet. I had heard its breath, and I had a sinking suspicion that it had heard mine too. With trembling hands, I hurriedly threw clothes, toiletries, and a few essentials into my suitcase. Every sound felt amplified. Each zipper, each rustle of fabric seemed to echo through the stillness of the house. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, almost drowning out the memories of that terrifying night. Almost. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every second felt like a race against an unseen force, a force that was waiting for me to stop, waiting for me to let my guard down. My every instinct screamed to run, But leaving the house in the dead of night felt even worse. The darkness outside pressed against the windows, thick and foreboding. What if the presence was waiting for me out there? I cursed under my breath as I zipped up the suitcase and stood up, my legs shaking beneath me. My plan was simple. Get out, check into a hotel, and never come back. I'd sell the house, burn it down if I had to. I just needed to leave. I grabbed my phone from the bedside table. No new messages. No missed calls. It was as if the world had gone silent, leaving me alone in this waking nightmare. The front door felt miles away as I descended the stairs. Each step creaked under my weight, and every creak felt like an announcement to the thing that had been lurking in the attic. It knew I was leaving. The idea sent a shiver down my spine, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The hallway leading to the front door stretched before me like a dark tunnel. I tightened my grip on my suitcase, my knuckles white, and forced myself to keep moving. I reached for the door handle, fingers trembling as I grasped it. But the moment I touched it, the air in the house shifted. A low, barely perceptible sound, like a whisper carried on the wind, brushed against my ears. My heart skipped a beat. I held my breath, listening, hoping that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Then it came again, a soft, unmistakable sigh, as if someone or something was breathing right behind me. I spun around, my back pressed against the door, eyes wide and scanning the darkness. Nothing. The hallway was empty, the stairs still, but I knew better now. The presence in the house wasn't bound by the rules of the living. It didn't need to be seen to be felt. I turned back to the door, fumbling with the lock. My hand shook so violently that it took me several tries to get the deadbolt open. Each second felt like a lifetime. Every failed attempt at unlocking the door confirmation that something was closing in on me. Finally, the lock clicked open, and I pulled the door wide, the cool night air rushing in like a breath of fresh sanity. I was about to step outside when something stopped me in my tracks. A faint, rhythmic thudding sound coming from the second floor. The attic. My breath caught in my throat. The sound grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't breathing this time. It was footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, pacing back and forth across the attic floor. Each thud sent vibrations through the house, through me. Run. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the ground, as if whatever was upstairs had reached out and taken hold of me. The thudding continued, growing more intense, almost angry. I had to get out. With a burst of adrenaline, I stepped over the threshold and slammed the door shut behind me. The noise of the lock clicking back into place felt like a final, desperate barrier between me and whatever was stalking the upper floors. I stumbled down the front steps, gasping for air as I hurried to my car. The suitcase banged against my leg, but I didn't care. I needed to put as much distance between me and that house as possible. As I reached my car, I yanked open the driver's side door, tossing my suitcase into the back seat without even looking. My fingers fumbled with the keys, the cool metal slick with sweat. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to jam the key into the ignition and turn it. The car roared to life, but as the headlights illuminated the driveway, something in the rearview mirror caught my eye. A shadow. I froze, my foot hovering over the gas pedal as I stared into the mirror. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a tree branch swaying in the wind. Maybe, but then the shadow moved. It wasn't outside the car. It was inside. My blood turned to ice as I turned slowly, dreading what I knew I would see. There, sitting in the back seat, was a figure. A vague, dark shape, hunched over and motionless. It was like the shadow of a person, but its edges were wrong, blurred, as though it didn't belong in this world. I couldn't breathe. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I stared at the figure, too terrified to blink. It didn't move, but I could feel its presence, cold and oppressive, like the air had been sucked out of the car. For a moment, I thought I might pass out. My vision swam, my heart hammering in my chest. But then, the figure slowly turned its head. I didn't wait to see its face. With a scream, I threw the car into reverse and slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched as I sped out of the driveway, my pulse racing. my mind a blur of panic and fear. The house disappeared into the night, swallowed by the darkness as I drove. But even as the miles stretched between us, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't truly escaped. The shadow in the back seat, it had followed me. I don't know how long I drove that night. Time became a blur, the road ahead melting into an endless stretch of asphalt. Every bump, every turn seemed to drag me deeper into a growing sense of dread. The shadow in the back seat lingered in my mind, more real than the car beneath me or the road outside. My knuckles were white as I gripped the steering wheel, refusing to glance back, terrified of what I might see. The minutes ticked by in agonizing silence, broken only by the hum of the engine. My heartbeat never seemed to slow. Every nerve in my body remained taut, as if I was a puppet held by invisible strings. I wanted to believe it was over, that I had escaped whatever had been lurking in the house. But deep down I knew better. The presence hadn't left me. It was still there. At some point, I found myself pulling into a roadside gas station, its flickering neon sign casting long shadows across the deserted lot. I parked the car far from the station's entrance, not out of choice, but because my mind refused to let me step out into the open. I felt exposed, vulnerable under the dim lights. My breathing was ragged as I sat there, engine idling, trying to calm the tremors in my hands. A part of me considered driving on, pushing further until exhaustion took over. But I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that if I didn't stop now, something far worse would happen. I needed a plan. I needed to think. With trembling fingers, I turned off the engine. Silence descended upon me like a suffocating blanket, thick and oppressive. The darkness outside the car seemed to press in, and I felt that overwhelming sense of being watched once again. I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that shadowy figure sitting in the back seat. Nothing. The back seat was empty. For a fleeting moment, relief washed over me. Maybe it had all been in my head, a product of my fear, of the terror that had gripped me ever since the night those sounds came from the attic. But just as quickly as the relief came, it vanished. I knew better. It wasn't over. I stared into the mirror, my eyes scanning every corner of the back seat, every inch of the car. No shadows, no figures, nothing. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something subtle, something just out of reach. That's when I noticed it. There on the back window, just faintly visible in the corner, a single handprint. It was small, smudged as though pressed against the glass from inside. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen it earlier. Had it been there the whole time? Or had it just appeared? My chest tightened as I leaned closer, trying to get a better look. The handprint was childlike, too small to belong to any adult. A cold realization crept over me. There hadn't been anyone in my car. No children. No one. And yet, that handprint was there. Impossible. Undeniable. A rush of panic seized me. My fingers fumbled for the door handle, desperate to get out, to put distance between myself and that cursed car. But as I pushed the door open and stepped into the cold night air, I realized something far worse. The handprint hadn't been from the inside. It was on the outside of the glass. My breath hitched in my throat as I stumbled back, my eyes wide with terror. Someone or something had pressed their hand against the window while I was inside, unaware. I spun around, scanning the empty gas station lot, expecting to see some figure lurking in the shadows. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the gas pumps and the distant chirp of crickets. I backed away from the car, every sense on high alert. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Had someone followed me from the house? But how? And why? I thought about the figure in the back seat, the shadow I'd seen earlier. Maybe it hadn't been inside the car. Maybe it had been outside, watching, waiting. The sound of my phone buzzing broke through my thoughts. I pulled it out of my pocket, my fingers shaking as I looked at the screen. An unknown number. My heart raced as I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to answer it. I knew, deep down, that whoever was calling wasn't calling with good news. But I couldn't stop myself. With a trembling hand, I swiped to answer. Hello? My voice came out barely more than a whisper. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a faint, distorted voice crackled through the speaker. "Did you think you could run?" I froze, my blood turning to ice. "I don't know who you are, but..." The voice cut me off, growing clearer, more menacing. "You can't escape. It's already with you." My heart pounded in my chest as I struggled to form words. "What do you mean? Who are you?" Another crackle of static. Then, just before the line went dead, the voice whispered one final sentence. "Check your back seat." The call disconnected, leaving me in stunned silence. My breath came in shallow gasps as I slowly turned back to the car. The windows were dark, reflecting the gas station's dim lights. I couldn't see inside. My heart raced, every instinct telling me to run, to leave the car behind and never look back. But I couldn't. I had to know. With slow, deliberate steps, I approached the car, my pulse pounding in my ears. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of the air itself was pressing down on me, dragging me towards something I couldn't escape. I reached the car and peered into the back seat. It was empty. No shadows, no figures, no signs of anything unusual. Just the empty seat, bathed in the dim light of the gas station. I let out a shaky breath, half laughing at myself for being so paranoid. But then, just as I turned away, I saw it. The handprint. It was gone, and in its place, smeared across the window in what looked like dirt or grime, was a single word. "Stay." My stomach twisted in knots as I backed away from the car. The word seared into my mind. I didn't know what was happening or why, but one thing was clear. I wasn't alone. Something was out there, watching me, taunting me, and it wasn't going to let me go. I needed help, but where could I turn? I stumbled back from the car, the word "stay" still smeared across the window, taunting me in the dim light of the gas station. My heart was racing, the cold night air biting at my skin, but I felt trapped, frozen in place. I didn't know what to do. Drive away and risk whatever was following me, or stay and confront the unknown that had been haunting me since I found that note. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever this presence was, it had been growing stronger with each passing hour. It was no longer just a shadow in the corner of my eye or a cold draft through the cracks of my house. Now, it was leaving messages, whispering threats into the night, and I was powerless to stop it. I needed help. My mind raced, trying to think of anyone I could call, someone who might believe me. But who would? I could already imagine the conversation. "Hey, someone or something is following me, leaving messages, appearing in the back seat of my car." No one would believe me. I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Just then, the gas station door swung open with a low creak, snapping me out of my thoughts. An old man with a scruffy beard and a worn-out cap shuffled out. He looked up at me, eyes narrowing slightly, as if he could sense something was off. "Everything all right, miss?" His voice was rough, gravelly, the kind that comes from years of smoking or yelling over loud machinery. He glanced at my car, his eyes lingering on the smeared message across the window. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. How could I explain the unexplainable? How could I tell him that something, some malevolent force, was after me without sounding insane? I'm not sure," I finally stammered, glancing back at the car. The handprint, the message, it was all real. But how could I make him understand? The old man frowned, stepping closer, his eyes studying me with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He chuckled dryly, but his humor quickly faded when he noticed the look on my face. "Something wrong with your car?" I shook my head. "It's not the car. I hesitated, glancing back at the window again. The word was still there, smeared and unmistakable. There was someone following me. I saw them, I think. The old man's expression hardened. "You sure?" I nodded slowly, my pulse quickening as the weight of my words settled in. "There's something or someone. I don't know who they are, but they've been watching me. They left that message." I pointed to the car window, the smear of the word glaring back at me like an accusation. The old man's gaze followed my finger, his brows furrowing. "Well now, that's a new one." He looked back at me, his face unreadable. "If you're in trouble, I can call the sheriff, but ain't nobody been through here in hours. You're the first car I've seen since sundown." His words sent a shiver down my spine. Hours? I had been driving for what felt like eternity, but to hear it confirmed that no one else had been out here made the isolation even more palpable. No, it's not, I trailed off, struggling to find the right words. I don't think calling the sheriff would help. The old man rubbed his chin, looking unconvinced. If you're being followed, miss, you should get out of here. Head to town, somewhere with more people. His voice was calm, but there was an underlying edge, a kind of urgency that made me realize he knew more than he was letting on. Why don't you just drive? He asked, nodding toward the car. Looks like you're already halfway out of town. Keep going and don't look back. I swallowed hard. The thought of getting back in that car, of driving with whatever presence was still lingering, sent a wave of nausea through me. But the alternative, staying here alone in the middle of nowhere, felt worse. I don't know where to go, I admitted, my voice shaking. I just need to get away. The old man gave me a long, hard look, his eyes narrowing. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. You listen to me, girl. Whatever's out there, it don't belong here. I've seen things in my time, strange things. You don't go looking for trouble. You hear? You leave it behind. You leave now, before it gets any worse. His words sent a chill through me. There was something about the way he said it, like he knew exactly what I was dealing with. Like he'd seen this before. I wanted to ask him more, to press him for details. But before I could, a sharp, cold breeze whipped through the lot, cutting through my jacket and sending a shiver down my spine. I glanced around, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. That feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever. My skin prickled with the sensation, and I knew, deep down, that whatever was after me hadn't left. It was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to slip up. I turned back to the old man, but he was already walking away, heading back toward the gas station. Remember what I said, girl, he called over his shoulder. Don't go looking for it. It'll find you soon enough. And with that, he disappeared into the building, leaving me standing alone in the empty lot. I turned back to the car, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't stay here. The old man's words echoed in my mind. Leave now before it gets any worse. I had to move, had to get out of here. Taking a deep breath, I walked back to the car, my eyes flicking nervously to the window where the word stay was still smeared. My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle, half expecting something to jump out at me the moment I opened it. But nothing happened. The car was silent still. I slipped into the driver's seat, my pulse pounding in my ears. I started the engine and pulled out of the gas station, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was behind me, watching my every move. As I drove, the darkness outside seemed to close in, the road ahead winding deeper into the unknown. My mind raced, replaying the events of the past few days. The note, the figure, the message on the window. I couldn't escape it. The highway stretched on in front of me, a seemingly endless ribbon of asphalt swallowed by the night. My headlights illuminated only the narrowest sliver of the road ahead, and the world outside felt like a black void, swallowing everything it touched. My grip on the steering wheel was tight, knuckles white under the strain. Every second that ticked by felt heavier than the last. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, convinced that at any moment I would see that figure again. The shadowy form that had been haunting my thoughts, the one that had appeared so briefly in the back seat. My skin prickled with the ever-present sense that something, or someone, was still there, hiding just beyond the range of my sight. The miles dragged on, but my mind was anywhere but the road. The old man's words kept echoing in my head. Don't go looking for it. It'll find you soon enough. What had he meant? Had he encountered this entity before? What did he know that I didn't? And why hadn't he offered more help? More guidance? The fear in his eyes, though he had tried to hide it, was unmistakable. Whatever was after me, it wasn't human. I was sure of it now. It wasn't just some stalker or deranged stranger. This was something darker. I should have driven straight to town, to the safety of streetlights and other people. But something in me was compelled to keep driving into the night, as if a force was pulling me, guiding me to some unknown destination. It didn't feel right, but the fear and adrenaline were clouding my judgment. The road narrowed. and the trees on either side grew denser, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The sense of isolation deepened, and with it, the air seemed to thicken, as though I was driving into something unnatural. I slowed the car, feeling my breath hitch as I scanned the surroundings, hoping for any sign of civilization. That's when I saw it, a dim light flickering in the distance, far off to the side of the road. It wasn't a street light or the glow of a house. It was more like a lantern, swinging gently in the breeze. I squinted, trying to make out where the light was coming from. A dirt path veered off the main road, leading into the woods where the lantern hung from a low branch. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, but my body betrayed me, my foot easing off the gas as I brought the car to a slow stop. I sat there for a moment, staring at the light, my heart racing. It was irrational. It was dangerous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was meant to follow that light, that it was calling me just like the old man had warned. I pulled over to the side of the road, the gravel crunching under the tires, and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. My hands trembled as I unbuckled my seatbelt, my mind screaming at me to reconsider. Don't go. You know this is a bad idea. Turn back. Get back in the car. Drive away. But I didn't listen. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment, an old habit my father had drilled into me for emergencies, and opened the door. The cold night air rushed in, biting at my skin as I stepped out. The forest loomed ahead, the trees standing like dark sentinels, watching my every move. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and began walking toward the path. The lantern swayed gently, casting eerie shadows that danced along the ground. The path was uneven, overgrown with weeds and roots, but it was clear enough to follow. My heart pounded louder with each step, the sense of foreboding growing stronger. The deeper I went, the more I felt the presence of something watching me. It was the same oppressive feeling I had felt before, but now it was more palpable, like the air itself was pressing down on me. I reached the lantern, hanging from a low branch. It flickered faintly, casting just enough light to reveal a small clearing beyond it. And there, in the center of the clearing, was something that stopped me cold. A stone slab. It was large, almost like an altar, covered in moss and dirt, as though it had been there for centuries. And on its surface, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Carvings, strange symbols etched into the stone. Symbols I didn't recognize but instinctively knew were wrong. They radiated a dark energy, a malevolence that seemed to hum in the air. And then I saw it, a small object lying in the center of the slab. I stepped closer, my breath catching in my throat as I realized what it was. My necklace, the one I had lost weeks ago, the one I thought I had simply misplaced somewhere in my house. I reached out hesitantly, my fingers trembling as I picked it up. It was cold to the touch, unnaturally cold, as though it had been lying there in the dark for years. But it was unmistakably mine. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the clearing, and the lantern flickered violently, casting the clearing into momentary darkness. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking as I scanned the trees around me, feeling the oppressive weight of unseen eyes. And then from the shadows I heard it, a whisper. It was soft at first, barely audible, but it grew louder, clearer. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to listen. You shouldn't have come. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The voice was low, chilling, and unmistakably close. It wasn't coming from the trees. It wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from the stone slab. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of there as fast as I could. But before I could move, the voice came again, louder, more insistent. You're too late. A cold, unrelenting dread washed over me, and I knew, without a doubt, that I had made a terrible mistake. I shouldn't have followed the light. I shouldn't have left the road. And now, whatever was out there, whatever had been following me, had found me. The lantern's flame flickered once more, casting erratic shadows around the clearing as I stood frozen in place. The voice, now gone, left a palpable silence behind, one that felt more threatening, than the words themselves. My mind raced, desperate to understand what was happening, but every logical thought was drowned in a rising tide of panic. I clutched the necklace tightly in my hand, feeling the cold metal bite into my skin. My legs were shaking, threatening to give way beneath me, but I forced myself to take a step back. Slowly, carefully. The path was behind me. I just had to turn and run. My body was screaming for me to move, to flee from the oppressive darkness, but fear had rooted me to the spot. That's when I saw it. Emerging from the shadows beyond the stone slab was a figure, tall, shrouded in darkness, with eyes that gleamed unnaturally in the faint light. It moved with an unsettling grace, like it was gliding rather than walking. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it, heart hammering against my ribs. Its form was vague, amorphous almost, as if it was made of the very shadows that surrounded it. But its eyes, those piercing, glowing eyes, were fixed on me, unblinking and cold. There was something ancient in its gaze, something that spoke of a malice that had existed long before I ever stumbled into this clearing. I couldn't tear my eyes away. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, but I was paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of the thing standing before me. It wasn't human, whatever it was something far more sinister. The figure didn't speak, but I could feel its presence pressing down on me, suffocating and cold. The air around me seemed to thicken, making it harder to breathe. I took another shaky step backward, my mind reeling with the realization that I wasn't just being watched anymore. I was being hunted. Then it moved, not toward me, but around the slab, its eyes never leaving mine. It circled the stone, like a predator toying with its prey. Every movement was smooth, deliberate, as if it was savoring the fear it was instilling in me. And then it spoke again. "You took what is mine." The voice was a low, guttural rasp, like the grinding of stone on stone. It echoed in the clearing, reverberating through my skull. I could feel the words more than hear them, as if they were being whispered directly into my mind. My eyes darted to the necklace in my hand, the necklace that had somehow ended up on the slab, miles from where I had last seen it. My mind struggled to piece it together, but nothing made sense. How could it have gotten here? And why did this thing care about it? I didn't know, I stammered, my voice barely more than a whisper. The words felt inadequate, hollow, but it was all I could manage. The figure stopped moving, its glowing eyes narrowing. The oppressive weight of its gaze intensified, and I could feel my pulse thudding in my ears, deafening in the silence. "You were warned." It wasn't a question. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the cold finality of someone, or something, that had been watching me for far longer than I realized. The old man's warning flashed through my mind. Don't go looking for it. It'll find you soon enough. He had known. He had known something was out here, something far worse than a mere stalker or ghost. And I had walked straight into its grasp. The figure moved again, gliding closer this time. The distance between us was shrinking, and with it, the cold dread that had been gnawing at my insides grew unbearable. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't let it get any closer. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, I spun on my heel and bolted back toward the path. The trees blurred past me as I sprinted, my feet pounding against the uneven ground. The branches clawed at me, tugging at my clothes, but I didn't care. All I could think about was getting away from that thing, whatever it was, before it caught up to me. Behind me, I could hear it, the sound of something moving through the trees, faster than any human could, its presence looming like a shadow over my every step. It was coming for me, and it wasn't going to stop. I burst out of the woods, heart hammering in my chest as I stumbled toward my car. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys, adrenaline surging through my veins. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and locked it in one fluid motion. The engine roared to life, and I peeled away from the side of the road, tires screeching on the asphalt. For a few moments, all I could hear was the pounding of my heart and the roar of the engine as I sped down the highway. The oppressive darkness outside the car seemed to thin, the night no longer pressing in on me with such intensity. But even as the miles passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those glowing eyes staring back at me from the back seat. But there was nothing, just the empty road stretching out behind me. Yet the fear remained, gnawing at the edges of my mind, because I knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. Whatever had found me in that clearing wasn't going to stop. It wasn't bound to that place, and now that it had marked me, it would follow. I drove through the night, unsure of where I was going or what to do next. But one thing was certain. There was no escaping the truth. Whatever had been watching me, whatever had been waiting in the shadows for so long, was still out there. And it wasn't done with me yet. The drive home should have been a relief, a chance to put distance between me and whatever had been lurking in those woods. But as the miles ticked away, the growing unease settled deep in my bones. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, convinced that any moment I'd see something materialize in the back seat, those glowing eyes locking onto mine. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, and I pressed the gas pedal harder, the road blurring beneath my tires. I couldn't outrun the feeling that I was being followed, not physically, but spiritually, as if whatever was out there had latched onto me, and no amount of speed could sever that connection. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. The jolt of it made my heart leap into my throat. I hesitated, glancing down at the screen. It was a number I didn't recognize. I knew, without a doubt, that I shouldn't answer it. But the phone kept vibrating, relentless, the screen glowing against the dark interior of the car. Against my better judgment, I grabbed it, pressing the answer button without saying a word. At first, there was silence on the other end, a long, drawn-out quiet that seemed to stretch for eternity. My pulse raced, my breath shallow, waiting for something, anything. Then, faintly, a voice whispered through the speaker. "You can't run from this." The voice was low, distorted, like it was being carried through layers of static. But I recognized it instantly. It was the same voice from the clearing, the same haunting presence that had taunted me from the shadows. My grip tightened around the phone, panic rising like bile in my throat. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound strong. "What do you want?" There was a pause, and then the voice spoke again, colder this time. "I want what's mine." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I threw the phone onto the seat beside me, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I couldn't think straight. My mind raced with fragmented thoughts, trying to make sense of the impossible. I wanted to believe it was some kind of prank, a cruel joke played by someone who knew too much about my fears. But deep down, I knew better. The thing from the woods, the entity that had followed me, wasn't done with me. It wasn't just a fleeting presence confined to that cursed clearing. It was here now, in my life, in my home, and it wanted something I couldn't understand. The rest of the drive was a blur. My vision was narrowed, focused on the road ahead, but my thoughts were miles away, trapped in the nightmare I'd stumbled into. The familiar sights of my neighborhood did little to comfort me when I finally pulled into the driveway. Instead, they felt foreign, warped, as if I had entered a world where things looked the same, but were fundamentally different. I sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the darkened silhouette of my house. The windows reflected the streetlights, offering no glimpse inside. A shiver crept down my spine as I imagined what might be waiting for me in there. Was it safe to go back? Would it follow me inside? Finally, I forced myself to move. I couldn't stay in the car all night. I grabbed my phone, pocketed it, and stepped out into the cool night air. Every step toward the house felt like I was walking deeper into a trap. My keys jingled in my hand as I approached the front door, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. As I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards greeted me. I flicked on the light switch, illuminating the hallway, but the sense of safety that usually came with the warmth of home was absent. I closed the door behind me, locking it, but the feeling of dread remained, lingering in the air like a specter. The house was too quiet. I moved cautiously through the rooms, checking each one as if I expected something to be waiting in the shadows. The living room was empty, as was the kitchen, And when I finally made my way upstairs to my bedroom, I was met with the same eerie stillness. It wasn't until I reached the hallway outside my bedroom that I saw it. The door to the attic was ajar. I stopped in my tracks, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. The attic door had been shut when I left the house. I was sure of it. I stared at the crack in the door, the darkness beyond it seeming to pulse with malevolence. It felt like the shadows were watching me, waiting for me to make a move. A voice inside my head told me to leave, to turn around, walk out of the house, and never come back. But I couldn't. I couldn't abandon my own home to whatever had invaded it. Slowly, I reached out, pushing the door open wider. The creak of the hinges sent a chill down my spine, and I strained my ears for any sound, any sign that something was lurking inside. The attic was dark, the single bulb hanging from the ceiling casting long, eerie shadows over the boxes and furniture stored up there. For a moment, I saw nothing unusual, just the clutter of an old attic. But then my eyes landed on something that made my blood run cold. Footprints. They were faint but unmistakable, a trail of dust disturbed by something, or someone, who had been up here. The footprints led from the far corner of the attic, weaving through the boxes, and stopped right at the edge of the stairs, right where I was standing. I backed away, my heart racing. Whoever or whatever had been in the attic had come to the stairs, had stood where I was now, watching me. My breath came in shallow gasps, and I stumbled down the stairs, slamming the attic door shut behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The fear that had gripped me in the woods had followed me home. And no matter how many locks I bolted or how many lights I left on, I knew it wouldn't be enough. Something was in my house, and it was waiting. The following morning, I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. I hadn't slept. I hadn't even tried. All night, I had listened for the smallest of sounds. The creak of a floorboard, a whisper of movement, but nothing had stirred. The attic door remained shut, and for all outward appearances, the house was still. But inside, I felt like I was teetering on the edge of something dark, something unimaginable. The footprints in the attic haunted my every thought. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still there, waiting, watching. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. The sense of dread was suffocating, and I was running out of options. I needed answers. I needed to know what had followed me from the woods, what had invaded my home, and why it seemed so intent on tormenting me. There was only one person I could think of who might be able to help. Someone who knew the history of the town and its surrounding areas better than anyone else. Mrs. Calhoun, the elderly woman who lived at the end of the street. She had lived in the neighborhood for over 60 years, and the stories she knew were the kind most people didn't want to believe. Ghost stories, legends of hauntings, disappearances, all the things that were whispered about but never spoken of in polite company. I had only ever exchanged pleasantries with her in passing, but I knew she was my best shot at understanding what was happening. I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door, the morning air biting at my skin as I made my way down the street. Mrs. Calhoun's house was old, with weathered shutters and a front porch that sagged under the weight of time. As I approached, I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I was making a mistake. But the memory of the footprints pushed me forward. I needed answers, and this might be my only chance to get them. I knocked on the door, the sound echoing through the stillness. A few moments later, the door creaked open, and Mrs. Calhoun appeared in the doorway, her sharp eyes narrowing as she took in my disheveled appearance. "Well, this is a surprise," she said, her voice raspy but not unkind. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my nerves. "I think I might have." Her expression softened slightly, and she stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. The inside of her house was exactly what I had expected, cluttered with old furniture, faded photographs, and the faint smell of lavender. She led me to the small sitting room and gestured for me to take a seat. "So," she said, settling into a worn armchair across from me, "what brings you here?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to begin, but then the words started tumbling out. Everything from the strange feeling in the woods to the footprints in the attic. I told her about the phone call, the voice that had haunted me, and the sense that something was always watching. always following. She listened quietly, her eyes never leaving mine, and when I finally finished, she sat back in her chair, her hands folded in her lap. "I've heard stories like this before," she said slowly. "Not often, but enough to know that you're not imagining things. There are places in this world where the veil between the living and the dead is thin. Those woods you were in, that's one of those places. It draws things to it, dark things." My skin prickled at her words, and I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. "But why me? Why is it following me?" Mrs. Calhoun's gaze was piercing, and for a moment I felt like she was looking straight through me, seeing something I couldn't. "Sometimes it's not about why," she said softly. "Sometimes it's about who. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and now it's attached itself to you. It's not letting go because it sees something in you, something it wants." My stomach churned with unease. "What does it want?" She shook her head, her expression grim. "I can't say for sure, but whatever it is, it won't stop until it gets it." A heavy silence settled between us, and I struggled to process what she was telling me. It was one thing to suspect that something supernatural was at play, but hearing it confirmed out loud was a whole different kind of terror. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How do I stop it?" Mrs. Calhoun leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "You need to confront it. Face whatever it is head on. It's feeding off your fear, your uncertainty. The longer you let it control you, the stronger it gets. But if you stand up to it, show it you're not afraid, you might be able to break its hold." Her words filled me with a cold dread. The thought of confronting whatever had been haunting me, whatever had followed me home, was almost unbearable. But what choice did I have? I couldn't keep living in fear, waiting for it to strike. I thanked Mrs. Calhoun for her time and left her house, my mind racing with the weight of what I had to do. As I walked back to my house, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the street. It felt like the calm before the storm, a brief moment of peace before the darkness descended once again. That night, I prepared myself for what was to come. I left the attic door open, a silent invitation to whatever had been lurking up there. I sat in the living room, the house quiet around me, and waited. Hours passed. The house was still, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared up at the ceiling, waiting for something, anything. And then, just as the clock struck midnight, I heard it, a faint creak, the sound of footsteps slowly descending the attic stairs. This time I didn't run. This time I didn't hide. I stood, my heart hammering in my chest, and turned to face the darkness at the top of the stairs. Whatever was coming for me, I was ready. The footsteps grew louder, and the shadows seemed to shift, coalescing into a figure at the top of the stairs. It was time to confront the unknown, and I wasn't backing down. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. It was just another ordinary evening in my quiet suburban neighborhood when I first noticed the figure. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across my living room as I prepared for another evening alone. The air was thick with the scent of my favorite candles, and the soft hum of the TV filled the silence. I settled into my worn-out couch, a cup of tea in hand, ready to lose myself in my favorite show. But as the light dimmed, I felt a strange shift in the atmosphere. It was subtle at first, a faint chill that crept along my spine, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I brushed it off as a draft, a consequence of the old windows in my house, and turned my attention back to the screen. That's when I caught the first glimpse. In the corner of my eye, I saw movement, not from the TV, but in the reflection of the glass cabinet across the room. I turned my head slowly, half expecting to see one of my cats scampering by, but nothing was there. The room was still, eerily quiet, save for the faint murmur of the television. I shook my head, convincing myself it was nothing more than a trick of the light. But the unease settled in my gut, refusing to let go. I tried to focus on the show, but the sensation of being watched crept over me. I found myself glancing toward the cabinet every few minutes, half expecting to see something or someone lurking just beyond my line of sight. The more I looked, the more the feeling grew, and my imagination began to spiral. Had I left the door open? Did I lock the back door? Just as I was about to dismiss my thoughts and retreat into the safety of distraction, it happened again. This time, the figure was clearer, more defined, a dark silhouette hovering just behind me in the reflection of the glass. I froze, heart racing, my breath hitching in my throat. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, but again, there was nothing there. The room was empty, the shadows deepening in the corners as the last remnants of daylight faded. I looked back at the reflection, the glass now just a normal pane of antique craftsmanship. But the lingering feeling of dread remained, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I forced myself to breathe, to calm down. Surely it was nothing, a figment of my overactive imagination, a consequence of the dimming light playing tricks on my eyes. I tried to rationalize it, tried to convince myself it was just fatigue, but as the minutes passed, I could feel a heaviness settle in the air around me, an oppressive weight that threatened to suffocate me. As the night wore on, I found myself unable to shake the sensation of being watched. I moved from the living room to the kitchen, turning on every light in the house, but the feeling clung to me like a shadow, unwavering. I began to pace, trying to distract myself with mundane chores, but even washing the dishes didn't ease the tension that had coiled tightly in my chest. It wasn't until I was wiping down the kitchen counter that I caught sight of it again. The figure, clearer than ever, standing just behind me in the glass of the window. This time it was closer, more menacing. I dropped the cloth, my heart racing as I spun around. But again, nothing was there. Panic bubbled within me as I moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. My breath fogged the glass as I searched for anything, anyone, who might be lurking just outside. But the street was empty, the shadows stretching out across the pavement like fingers reaching for the light. I leaned against the counter, my hands trembling. What was happening? Was I losing my mind? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Determined to confront this inexplicable dread, I grabbed my phone and texted my friend Sarah, hoping to find some comfort in her words. "Hey, are you busy?" I typed. "I feel really uneasy at home tonight." Within moments, my phone buzzed with a reply. "Just watching a movie." "What's up? You okay?" I hesitated for a moment, then typed back, "I don't know. I keep seeing a figure behind me in reflections. It's freaking me out." There was a pause before she responded. "Maybe it's just your imagination? Do you want me to come over?" The thought of having her here filled me with a mix of relief and embarrassment. What if I was being ridiculous? But I also felt the heaviness of isolation pressing down on me, and I needed someone, anyone, who could help me shake this feeling of dread. "Yes, please," I replied. "I'd feel better if you were here." After a brief exchange, we agreed that Sarah would come over in about 20 minutes. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. As I waited, I busied myself, cleaning up the kitchen, making sure the living room was tidy. But even with the activity, the oppressive feeling lingered, thickening the air around me. When the doorbell rang, I nearly jumped out of my skin. I hurried to the door, flinging it open to find Sarah standing on the doorstep, her face illuminated by the porch light. "Hey," she said cheerfully, but I could see the concern etched in her eyes as she took in my frazzled appearance. "What's going on?" I stepped aside, allowing her to enter. "You're not going to believe me," I began, shutting the door behind her. "But I keep seeing this figure in reflections. I don't know if I'm losing it or if there's something really here." As I led her into the living room, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled deep within me. I gestured to the glass cabinet, the TV reflecting our figures, and explained everything, the chills, the whispers, and the growing dread that had taken root in my home. As I spoke, I noticed Sarah's expression shift from concern to skepticism. "It's probably just your mind playing tricks on you," she said gently, though there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "We can sit together, watch a movie, and just relax. You'll see it's nothing." We settled onto the couch, the soft glow of the TV lighting up the room, but the feeling of being watched lingered in the air. Every flicker of light and shadow made my heart race, but I tried to focus on the movie. For a while it seemed to work. We laughed, joked, and the tension began to ebb, but as the clock ticked closer to midnight, the feeling returned, stronger, more insistent. I glanced at the glass cabinet, my heart pounding, and there it was, the figure, clearer than ever. "Sarah," I whispered, my voice trembling. She turned to look, and for a moment, we both stared at the reflection, a dark silhouette standing just behind me. I could see the fear in her eyes as she realized I wasn't imagining it. I see it too," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart raced as I felt the atmosphere shift, the air growing heavy and oppressive. I didn't know what this figure wanted, but it was here, and it was watching us. And in that moment, I knew we were about to find out exactly what that meant. The moment hung in the air, thick with an indescribable tension that wrapped around us like a suffocating blanket. I could see the figure's outline, vague yet undeniably present, hovering just beyond my shoulder. The reflection in the glass felt alive, its dark form watching us intently, and a wave of fear washed over me, cold and relentless. "What do we do?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I could barely articulate my thoughts, my mind racing as I struggled to process the reality of what we were facing. The sensation of being watched intensified, and I felt as if I was being pulled deeper into an abyss of dread. I turned to face her, my heart pounding. I don't know, but we can't just sit here. We need to." Before I could finish my sentence, the lights flickered. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift, but it sent my heart into a frenzy. A heavy silence enveloped the room, punctuated only by the low hum of the television, which suddenly felt eerily distant. "Did you see that?" Sarah's eyes widened, panic creeping into her expression. "Yes," I replied, my voice a mere whisper. "What is happening?" As if in response to our fear, the room plunged into darkness, the television screen flickering before going completely black. We were plunged into an oppressive silence, our breaths loud in our ears. "Let's check the fuse box," I suggested, trying to sound braver than I felt. I grabbed my phone, using its light to illuminate the darkened room as I led the way to the narrow hallway that led to the basement door. "Do you think we should just leave?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling as she hesitated at the threshold. "I don't like this." "We can't. We need to figure out what's happening. It's probably just a power outage," I replied, trying to mask the quiver in my own voice. "Let's just go check." We descended the creaking stairs, the beam from my phone flickering over the walls, casting long shadows that danced along with us. I reached for the light switch at the bottom of the stairs, but nothing happened. "Great," I muttered under my breath, feeling a knot of frustration and fear twist in my stomach. "Maybe we should go back up," Sarah suggested, her eyes darting nervously around the basement. "I really don't like this." "Just a minute," I insisted, forcing my feet to move forward into the darkened space. I guided the beam of light toward the fuse box, my heart pounding as I mentally counted the steps between us and the stairs. It was a small space, filled with the musty scent of old wood and forgotten items. Boxes were stacked haphazardly in the corners, casting eerie shapes in the dim light. As I reached the fuse box, I could feel Sarah's anxiety radiating from her. I opened the door, squinting to see if any fuses had blown. Just as I was about to check, the light from my phone flickered and died, plunging us into complete darkness. "Crap!" I exclaimed, panic clawing at my chest. I fumbled in my pockets, desperately searching for a backup flashlight. "I can't see anything. Let's just go back upstairs," Sarah urged, her voice rising in pitch. "No, wait," I said, finally finding a small keychain flashlight and clicking it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the space around us. "Look," as I turned to face her, the flashlight beam landed on the far wall of the basement, and my breath caught in my throat. There, etched into the wood paneling, was a series of strange symbols, overlapping and intertwining, as if someone had scratched them into the wall with great force. "What is that?" Sarah breathed, her fear palpable. "I don't know," I replied, stepping closer to examine the markings. The symbols were jagged and irregular, as though made by frantic hands. "It looks like some kind of language." Just then, the unmistakable sound of a creak echoed through the basement, followed by a faint rustling noise. My heart raced as I turned, aiming the flashlight toward the sound. But nothing was there, just the shadows and the quiet hum of the darkness surrounding us. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling as she moved closer to me. "Yes," I whispered, a chill creeping down my spine. "We need to go. Now." I turned to lead her back toward the stairs. But before we could take a step, a loud crash reverberated from above, sending us both jumping. The sound of something heavy falling echoed through the house, and the fear that had been simmering beneath the surface suddenly erupted. "Run!" I shouted, and we sprinted toward the stairs, the beam of my flashlight bouncing erratically in front of us. I could feel the dread closing in, as if something unseen was chasing us, urging us to leave. We burst up the stairs and into the living room, slamming the basement door behind us. I leaned against it, panting, trying to catch my breath. "What the hell was that?" I gasped, looking at Sarah, whose eyes were wide with terror. "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "What's going on?" As I caught my breath, I glanced back at the glass cabinet, and the figure was gone. I felt a mixture of relief and fear wash over me. Had it left? Or was it merely waiting, watching, biding its time? "We need to call the police," I said, my voice shaking. "We need to get out of here. Are you sure that's a good idea?" Sarah replied, her brow furrowed. "What if they think we're crazy?" I didn't care. I don't care what they think. Something's not right in this house, and I want help. As I reached for my phone to dial, the lights flickered back on, illuminating the room with an unsettling brightness. The soft hum of the television returned, but there was no comfort in it. Instead, it felt like an ominous warning. I picked up my phone and dialed, the tension thickening around us as the line rang. But just as I was about to speak to the operator, the TV screen flashed and went static, the image distorting into a chaotic mess of flickering light. My heart raced, panic clawing at my throat. "Hello," I said, my voice barely audible over the chaos. "Is anyone there?" Static filled the air, and I could swear I heard a whispering voice, faint but unmistakable. "Get out," it murmured, chilling me to the bone. "What?" I shouted into the phone, gripping it tightly. "Who is this?" The voice grew louder, clearer, and I recognized it instantly. It was my own voice, distorted and echoing in the static. "Get out," it repeated, the words wrapping around me like a shroud of dread. "Sarah, did you hear that?" I turned to her, my heart racing, but she was frozen in place, staring at the TV screen. "Get out," the voice continued, and I could see the fear etched into Sarah's features as she grasped the reality of what we were facing. "What's happening?" I demanded, panic rising in my chest. I dropped my phone and rushed toward the television, desperate to understand. Suddenly, the figure reappeared in the reflection of the TV. This time, it was closer than ever, standing behind me, its face shrouded in shadow. I could feel its presence, a cold dread creeping up my spine. "Sarah, turn it off," I yelled, but my voice was lost in the static. As she fumbled for the remote, the figure in the reflection began to shift, its features becoming clearer, morphing into something grotesque and terrifying. I turned to confront it, but there was nothing there, just the normality of my living room, the shadows stretching out like dark fingers. But as I turned back to Sarah, the fear in her eyes mirrored my own. "We have to leave. Now!" We bolted toward the door, fear propelling us forward as we flung it open. The night air was crisp against our faces as we stumbled onto the porch, desperate for escape. The world outside felt surreal, the quiet of the night broken only by the soft rustle of leaves. "Where do we go?" Sarah gasped, glancing back at the house, the dark silhouette of the figure still looming in our minds. "Anywhere but here," I shouted, pulling her along the path that led away from the house, the chill of fear still clinging to us. But as we moved further away, I could feel the weight of the house pressing down on my shoulders. What had we awakened? What had been watching us all this time? And would it ever let us go? The chill of the night air cut through us as we hurried down the dimly lit street, our breaths visible in the cold, swirling around us like fog. Every shadow seemed to stretch and twist, as if trying to grasp us, and the distant hum of the night felt charged with an unsettling energy. I could still feel the weight of that figure's gaze, lingering on me, even though we were now outside. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. "I don't know," I admitted, glancing back at the house, which now loomed like a dark specter against the night sky. "We can't go back there. We need to find somewhere safe." We turned onto a quieter side street, where the moonlight bathed the ground in an eerie glow. As we walked, the adrenaline from the terrifying events began to wane, replaced by an uneasy silence. It felt like we had crossed some invisible line into a realm of unknown fears, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. "I can't believe this is happening," Sarah said, shaking her head in disbelief. "I thought we were just imagining things." "Me too," I said, rubbing my arms against the chill. But that voice, it felt real. In the reflection, there's something in that house, something we don't understand. As we walked further from my house, I pulled out my phone to call the police, but the screen was dark. I cursed under my breath and tried to turn it back on, but nothing happened. Panic surged again. I had lost all means of communication. "My phone's dead," I said, my voice strained. "This is just getting worse." "Great," Sarah muttered, running a hand through her hair. "What if it comes after us? What if it follows us here?" "Stop it," I said sharply, though my own mind raced with those same fears. "We need to keep moving." We made our way to the small park at the end of the street, its swings creaking gently in the wind. The familiar sight should have brought comfort, but instead, it felt like a twisted parody of safety. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches swaying ominously in the night. I spotted a park bench, and we sat down, trying to catch our breath. "Do you think we should go to a neighbor's house?" Sarah suggested, her eyes darting nervously around. "Someone must have seen us run out." "Maybe," I replied, rubbing my forehead as I struggled to formulate a plan. "But what if they don't believe us? What if we tell them and they think we're crazy? I can't even explain what happened." "Then what do we do?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "We can't just stay out here." "I know," I said, feeling the weight of her fears settle on my shoulders. "But we need to think clearly. Let's just sit here for a minute, catch our breath, and then decide what to do next." The silence wrapped around us, punctuated only by the distant rustling of leaves and the soft sounds of the night. I could see Sarah trembling slightly, and I reached over, placing a hand on her arm. "We'll be okay," I assured her, though doubt gnawed at my insides. But just as I began to relax, I heard it, a faint sound drifting through the park. A low, eerie whisper, like wind weaving through the trees. But there was something unmistakable about it. "Get out, get out." My heart raced, and I shot a glance at Sarah. "Did you hear that?" She nodded slowly, her eyes widening in fear. "What is it? Where is it coming from?" "It's coming from the direction of my house," I gasped, instinctively standing up. I turned to look back down the street, dread pooling in my stomach. "We need to go. Now!" Without waiting for a response, I began to jog toward the road, my heart pounding in my chest. Sarah hurried to keep pace with me, her breaths coming in quick, short bursts. As we reached the intersection, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, sending chills down my spine. We rounded the corner, and I suddenly stopped. My house loomed in the distance, shadows dancing across the windows. But something was off. "Wait," I said, grabbing Sarah's arm. "Do you see that?" In the dim light, I could make out movement in the yard, a dark figure shifting just beyond the reach of the porch light. My blood ran cold as I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure paused, then turned, and my stomach dropped as I recognized the familiar silhouette. It was the same figure from the reflection, its features indistinct yet hauntingly familiar. "Run!" I shouted, the word tearing from my throat as I grabbed Sarah's hand and yanked her away from the house. We sprinted down the street, fear propelling us forward as we dashed past streetlights, the glow barely cutting through the oppressive darkness. I could hear my heart thundering in my ears, drowning out the sound of our footsteps. We needed to find help, but who would believe us? As we raced through the night, I suddenly spotted a house with its porch light on, casting a warm glow onto the lawn. "There!" I exclaimed, pointing. "Let's go!" We ran up to the front door, and I knocked frantically, my heart racing. I could hear footsteps approaching from inside, the sound steady and rhythmic. My palms were slick with sweat, and the feeling of being watched returned with a vengeance. The door swung open, revealing an elderly man with a concerned expression. "What's going on?" he asked, taking in our disheveled appearance. "Please, we need help," I gasped, desperate for someone to listen. "Something is happening in my house. There's something in there." The man's brow furrowed, and he stepped aside, ushering us in. Come in. You're safe here." As we crossed the threshold, I glanced back toward my house, half expecting to see the figure standing there, watching us with that unsettling gaze. But the darkness swallowed it whole, leaving nothing but the quiet hum of the night behind. "Sit down," the man said, leading us to a small living room. "You're both clearly shaken. Just take a deep breath." I tried to calm myself, but the image of the figure haunted me. We saw something in the reflection of my TV, and then it followed us. It whispered, it told us to get out. "Whispered," the man echoed, concern etched on his face. "What do you mean?" "Something was in my house," Sarah chimed in, her voice trembling. "And it was watching us." The man nodded slowly, as if weighing our words. "I've lived here for many years, and strange things happen sometimes. People get a bit lost in their minds, but I can tell you two are genuinely scared." I opened my mouth to respond, but just then, the lights flickered in the room, and the air grew heavy with an unmistakable tension. "What's happening?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, the sound of static filled the air, echoing from a nearby radio. The man shot a look of alarm at the device, and in that moment, everything seemed to freeze. The room darkened, and for a split second, I could have sworn I saw the figure in the reflection of the window behind us, staring back at me with those haunting eyes. "Get out!" The voice, now clearer and sharper, echoed through the room, causing Sarah to jump beside me. "Enough!" the man shouted, reaching for the radio and yanking the plug from the wall. The static stopped, and the room fell silent once more. He turned to us, his expression grave. "Whatever is happening, it's not just in your head. We need to confront this." "What do you mean?" I asked, confusion swirling in my mind. He took a deep breath, glancing out the window as if expecting the figure to appear at any moment. "Sometimes things attach themselves to places, to people. You need to confront what you saw, or it will keep haunting you." "What do we do?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide. "Go back to your house," he said firmly. "Face it, but be careful. Whatever it is, it feeds off fear. Don't let it control you." I exchanged a look with Sarah, the weight of his words settling on us like a heavy blanket. "Are you sure?" I asked, my heart racing. "What if it's dangerous?" "It's dangerous to run," he replied. "You have to take control." As his words sank in, I felt a surge of determination. Maybe this was our only chance to confront whatever darkness had invaded my home. "Okay," I said, standing up straighter. "We'll do it. We'll go back." The man nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "I'll go with you. But remember, don't show fear." As we prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into the mouth of a beast. But deep down, I knew it was the only way to reclaim my life from the shadows that threatened to consume me. As we stepped back outside, the chill in the air felt even more pronounced, wrapping around us like a shroud. The street was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath our feet as we made our way back toward my house. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting unsettling shadows that danced with every gust of wind. I glanced nervously at Sarah, whose pale face mirrored my anxiety. The elderly man walked beside us, his presence somewhat comforting, yet also ominous. "Stay close to me," he instructed, his voice low and steady. "We're going to face whatever is inside." With each step, the knot of dread in my stomach tightened. The last time I had been in that house, Terror had gripped me as I saw that figure in the reflection. Now, the thought of returning sent icy fingers down my spine. As we approached my home, I could see the front porch light flickering erratically, as if something were trying to break through the veil of normalcy. The windows loomed dark and foreboding, and my heart raced at the thought of what lay within. We reached the door, and the elderly man paused, looking at us intently. Remember, do not show fear. Whatever you saw, you have the power to confront it. Taking a deep breath, I nodded, trying to summon whatever courage I had left. I pushed the door open, the creaking sound echoing in the stillness, and we stepped inside. The familiar scent of my home mingled with the tension in the air, creating a heavy atmosphere that felt almost alive. "Stay close," the man whispered, leading the way into the dimly lit living room. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on us, thickening the air. "Let's turn on the lights," I suggested, but as I reached for the switch, I was met with darkness. "The power's out," I realized, panic bubbling up once more. "Don't let it get to you," the man said, his voice steady. "The darkness is just a manifestation of your fear. It can't hurt you unless you let it." I nodded, trying to focus on his words rather than the rising tide of anxiety. "What do we do now?" "Follow me," he said, moving toward the hallway. I followed closely behind, with Sarah just a step behind me, her breath coming in shallow gasps. As we moved deeper into the house, I could hear the faint sound of my heartbeat echoing in my ears. The hallway felt long and claustrophobic, the walls closing in around us. We reached my bedroom door, and I hesitated, memories flooding back of the night I had seen that figure at the foot of my bed. The man turned to me, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "It's time to face it. Open the door." With trembling hands, I gripped the doorknob and turned it slowly. The door creaked open, revealing the darkness within. I stepped inside, the air heavy with tension. The window curtains swayed gently, though there was no breeze. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, and flicked on the flashlight I had kept in my nightstand. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the room. Everything looked the same. The bed, the dresser, my childhood posters on the walls. But the familiar surroundings felt alien in the dim light. I aimed the flashlight toward the corner of the room, my breath hitching as I caught a glimpse of the shadows moving. "There's something here," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Focus," the elderly man said, stepping into the room beside me. "Whatever it is, it feeds off fear. Don't give it power." As we scanned the room, I felt a chill run down my spine. The closet door stood slightly ajar, creaking softly as if inviting us to take a closer look. "I can't," I said, stepping back instinctively. "What if it's in there?" "Then we face it," he replied firmly. "You need to confront whatever is hiding in the shadows." "Together," Sarah added, her voice trembling but resolute. With a nod, I steeled myself and approached the closet. My heart raced as I reached for the door, but the man's steady presence gave me courage. I took a deep breath and flung the door open. The closet was empty, the space dark and uninviting, but as I peered inside, something glinted in the corner. I reached in, my fingers brushing against something cold and metallic. Pulling it out, I gasped it was a small, tarnished mirror. "What is this?" I whispered, holding it up to the light. The elderly man stepped closer, examining the mirror with a furrowed brow. "That looks like a reflection of what you fear most," he said quietly. Suddenly, the air grew thick with tension, and I felt a presence behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and there was the figure. It stood in the corner, its features obscured by shadows, but I could sense its gaze boring into me. "Get out," it whispered, the words curling around me like smoke. Fear surged through me, but I remembered the man's words. "You don't control me," I shouted, my voice echoing in the room. "I won't let you." The figure hesitated, and for a moment, I thought I saw it flicker like a candle struggling against the wind. "You can't escape," it rasped, but there was uncertainty in its tone. I held up the mirror, its surface reflecting not just my image but the fear I felt inside. "You are just a shadow," I declared, my voice steadying. "You can't hurt me." The figure recoiled, its form wavering as if caught in a tempest. "Leave this place," it screamed, and I could feel the walls trembling with its anger. "Not until you let me go," I yelled back, stepping forward with resolve. "You're nothing but a figment of my fear, and I refuse to give you power over me." With that declaration, I felt a surge of energy coursing through me. The flashlight beam intensified, casting away the shadows, and the figure began to dissolve before my eyes. It shrieked, a sound that echoed through the room, and then, just like that, it was gone. Silence enveloped us, the air lightening as the oppressive darkness receded. I looked around, heart racing, the reality of what had just happened settling in. Did we do it?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I think so," I replied, glancing at the elderly man, who smiled softly. "You faced your fear," he said, pride evident in his voice. "That takes great strength." As I took a deep breath, I felt the weight of the darkness lift from my shoulders. The room, once filled with dread, now felt like a sanctuary. I looked down at the tarnished mirror in my hands, a reminder of the battle I had fought. "We can leave this behind," I said, glancing back at the closet. "It has no hold on me anymore." The man nodded, and together we stepped out of the room, leaving the darkness behind. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt like I could reclaim my life. Stepping out of my bedroom felt like walking into a new world. The air was lighter, filled with a fresh energy that had been absent before. I glanced back at the open closet door, still feeling the remnants of fear flicker within me. But now, it was only a distant echo, something I had conquered. The elderly man followed closely, his expression calm and reassuring. Sarah stood beside me, her wide eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and lingering unease. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to let the light in," the man replied, gesturing toward the windows. "This house has been shrouded in darkness for too long. It's time to reclaim your space." With a determined nod, I moved toward the curtains, pulling them open with a flourish. Morning light flooded the room, illuminating every corner that had previously been cloaked in shadow. I felt the warmth wash over me, filling the void that fear had created. As I stood there, absorbing the sunlight, I realized I was not just fighting against a spectral figure, but also against the very essence of fear that had gripped my life for so long. This was about more than just that night. It was about reclaiming my power and my space. "Can you feel it?" I said, turning to Sarah, who was now looking more relaxed. "It's like the light is pushing away everything that scared me." "I can," she replied, a small smile breaking through her apprehension. "It feels freeing." The elderly man nodded, watching us with approval. "You both face something that many would shy away from. It's essential to remember that you hold the power to shape your reality." Suddenly, a noise echoed from the living room, a soft rustling, as if something was moving. My heart skipped a beat, and I exchanged worried glances with Sarah. "Stay close," the man urged, leading us into the hallway. The rustling grew louder, and as we approached the living room, I felt a mix of dread and curiosity. The scene that unfolded before us was unexpected. The light pouring in from the windows illuminated a figure, this time a familiar one. It was my younger brother, Ben, standing with wide eyes and a handful of colorful drawings scattered around him. "Ben," I exclaimed, rushing to him. "What are you doing here?" "I heard you screaming," he said, his voice trembling slightly. I was worried. His innocent concern brought a rush of warmth to my heart, a stark contrast to the darkness I had just confronted. I knelt down to his level, wrapping my arms around him. "I'm okay now, I promise. I just had to face something scary." "Like a monster?" he asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Yeah, something like that," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "But it's gone now, and it can't hurt us anymore." He glanced toward the elderly man, who smiled warmly. "Is he a good monster or a bad monster?" Ben asked innocently. The man chuckled softly. "There are no monsters here, only the shadows we create in our minds. But you're safe now, young one." Ben seemed to ponder that for a moment, his brow furrowing in thought. "Can I help?" he finally asked, his voice brightening. "Of course," I said, standing up and brushing my hands on my jeans. "We can all help each other. How about we make this place brighter together?" With newfound determination, we set to work. The three of us began clearing away clutter from the living room, moving furniture to let the light pour in through every window. I felt a sense of camaraderie between us, the bond of family creating a protective shield against the lingering shadows. As we worked, I shared the story of what had happened, explaining how fear had taken form and how I had confronted it. Ben listened intently, his little face reflecting awe and concern, and I saw in his eyes the understanding that fear was something that could be managed and not avoided. Once the living room was cleared and filled with light, I turned to Sarah and the elderly man. "What now? Is it really over?" The elderly man stepped forward, his expression serious yet kind. "This is just the beginning. Fear is a part of life, but it doesn't have to control you. You've taken the first step, and that's significant." "I think I get it," I said, glancing around the now vibrant living room. "It's about creating a space that feels safe and welcoming." "Yes," he affirmed. "And it's about remembering that you're never alone in facing your fears. You have each other." As if on cue, Ben chimed in. "And we can always make it brighter." He beamed up at me, his enthusiasm infectious. With the sun now fully shining through the windows, illuminating every corner, I felt a sense of hope bloom within me. I understood now that the shadows of my fears could never truly vanish. They could only be transformed by the light I chose to embrace. The elderly man nodded approvingly. "You have the strength to face whatever comes next, and you'll do it together. Remember this moment, for it will guide you when darkness tries to return." With a grateful smile, I realized that my battle was not merely about confronting ghosts, but about cultivating a life filled with love, support, and light. As the sun set that evening, casting golden hues through the windows, I knew that I was ready to face whatever lay ahead. And this time, I wouldn't face it alone. The days that followed our confrontation with fear felt transformative. The once heavy atmosphere in the house had lifted, replaced with a newfound lightness and warmth. My brother, Ben, and I spent our afternoons redecorating the living room, choosing bright colors and adding cheerful decor that made the space feel inviting. The elderly man had become a frequent visitor, sharing wisdom and stories that kept the house filled with laughter and chatter. However, amidst this wave of positivity, an unsettling feeling lingered in the back of my mind. While I had faced the dark figure in my bedroom, I couldn't shake the notion that the shadows of my past were not entirely vanquished. The feeling of being watched still crept into my thoughts, lurking just beyond the periphery of my awareness. One evening, after dinner, Ben was happily occupied in his room, engrossed in a new puzzle. I took this moment to sit down on the couch with a cup of tea, the steam swirling in the air as I took a deep breath. The sunlight had faded, and twilight cast a gentle blue hue throughout the room. I pulled my phone from my pocket, contemplating reaching out to Sarah, who had been a great source of support. Just as I began scrolling through my contacts, a soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I looked up, my heart racing slightly, the familiar tension creeping back in. "Ben," I called out, unsure if he had wandered into the living room. When there was no response, I stood up, my skin prickling with an anxious awareness. The knock came again, this time louder and more insistent. I glanced toward the door, the uncertainty twisting in my stomach. As I approached, the knocking ceased, and silence enveloped the house. I hesitated, feeling the weight of dread settle over me. Who could it be at this hour? I reached for the doorknob, my heart pounding in my chest. Peering through the peephole, I could see a silhouette, a figure standing on the porch. The dim light of the street lamp cast long shadows, obscuring their features. I took a step back, the lingering memories of that dark figure flooding my mind. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Please let me in," a voice replied from the other side. It was soft yet urgent, carrying an air of desperation that sent chills down my spine. "I need help." I hesitated, The last time I had opened the door without fully understanding the situation, it had led to a confrontation with my fears. But something about the tone in their voice pulled at my heartstrings, urging me to act. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door a crack. Standing before me was a young woman, her hair disheveled and her eyes wide with fear. "I'm sorry to intrude," she gasped, glancing over her shoulder. "I didn't know where else to go. Are you okay?" I asked, my instincts kicking in as I scanned her for signs of distress. "What's going on?" I think I'm being followed," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Please, I need to get away." Before I could respond, a flicker of movement caught my attention behind her. My heart raced as I noticed a shadowy figure lurking at the edge of the street, half hidden by the darkness. "Who is that?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "I don't know," she whispered, panic rising in her voice. "They've been watching me for days. I thought if I came here, I could find safety." Without thinking, I opened the door wider, allowing her to step inside. "You can stay here for now," I said, locking the door behind us. "Let's figure this out together." She sank onto the couch, visibly trembling. I hurried to grab a blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to help her feel more at ease. "Lila," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for letting me in." As we settled into the living room, I realized that the warmth I had cultivated was now at risk. The shadows I thought I had chased away were creeping back, threatening to invade this sanctuary I had built. I looked at Lila, noticing the haunted look in her eyes. It mirrored my own fear and confusion. "Can you tell me what happened?" I urged gently, sitting across from her. She took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she clutched the blanket tighter. "It started a few weeks ago. I noticed someone following me after work, always just out of sight. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then I started finding things, little notes left on my car, strange messages on my phone. My heart sank. The way she described her experiences resonated deeply with my own. "I understand how that feels," I admitted. "I've faced something similar in this house. I thought I had put it behind me, but it seems like shadows linger longer than we expect." Lila's eyes widened, and she leaned in, urgency etched across her features. "Have you seen them? The figure?" I nodded slowly, the memories flooding back. Every sleepless night, every flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. "I faced it. I thought I had chased it away, but now I'm not so sure." Just then, the silence was interrupted by a soft thud from the front porch. We both froze, the sound echoing ominously in the otherwise quiet house. My heart raced as I glanced toward the door, a sense of dread washing over me. "Stay here," I whispered to Lila, my instincts kicking in again. I moved cautiously toward the window, peering out to catch a glimpse of the darkened street. My breath hitched as I saw the shadow again, closer this time, standing under the flickering street lamp. It seemed to watch us, an ominous presence cloaked in darkness. "Who is it?" Lila whispered, her voice shaking with fear. "I don't know," I replied, my mind racing. "But we need to figure this out. Together." The air in the living room was thick with tension as we exchanged nervous glances, the reality of our situation weighing heavily on our minds. Lila huddled beneath the blanket, her eyes wide with fear, while I stood by the window, my heart pounding in my chest. The shadow outside shifted slightly, its outline dark against the dim light of the street lamp, sending a chill down my spine. "We can't just wait here," I said, my voice low but firm. "If someone is watching us, we need to take control of the situation." Lila nodded, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "What do you suggest?" I hesitated, knowing that the next steps we took could either empower us or plunge us deeper into the unknown. "We need to find out who, or what that is. We can't let fear dictate our actions." "Are you sure that's safe?" she asked, biting her lip. "What if they come inside?" I took a deep breath, recalling the dark figure I had encountered before. I faced something similar before, and I won't let it control me again. But this time, I'm not alone. With a resolve I didn't quite feel, I grabbed a flashlight from the side table and turned it on, illuminating the room with a warm glow. I moved cautiously to the door, ensuring that Lila remained behind me. "Stay close," I whispered. "If anything goes wrong, get out of here." I opened the door slowly, the creaking hinges echoing in the silence. The cool night air washed over us, and the first tendrils of fear coiled around my heart. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I steeled myself against the urge. The figure outside had already drawn me into this confrontation, and I was determined to confront it. I stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking underfoot, and scanned the darkness. The figure was still there, but it had taken a step back into the shadows, its form becoming indistinct. My pulse quickened as I called out, "Who are you? What do you want?" Silence hung in the air, thick and heavy, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the gentle breeze. Then the figure spoke, its voice barely a whisper, barely audible over the night sounds. "You shouldn't have come here." My heart raced as I gripped the flashlight tighter. "Why are you following us? What do you want?" "Your past isn't buried," the figure replied, stepping forward into the dim light. My breath caught in my throat as the shadows receded slightly, revealing a familiar face. It was a woman, her features gaunt and worn, eyes dark with despair. I felt a wave of recognition wash over me. "Jenna," I gasped, disbelief coursing through me. Jenna had been a close friend from my childhood, someone I thought had vanished from my life after a series of troubling events had driven us apart. "What are you doing here?" I asked, feeling a mix of confusion and concern. "You disappeared. We all thought you were gone for good." Jenna's gaze flickered to Lila, who had now joined me on the porch, her expression a mix of wariness and concern. "I had to come back. I've been searching for you. For help," she said, her voice trembling. "There's something dark in this town, something that won't let me go." "What do you mean?" I pressed, feeling a mix of dread and curiosity. "I've seen it, felt it," Jenna replied, stepping closer, the flashlight illuminating her face. "It's watching us, feeding on our fears and regrets. I thought if I could find you, we could confront it together." Lila's eyes widened as she took a step back, her voice shaking. "Is that why you've been following us? Why you've been watching me?" "I didn't mean to scare you," Jenna said, her voice softening. "I was trying to protect you. I thought if I stayed close, I could keep you safe." "What do we do?" I asked, feeling a surge of anxiety. "How do we confront it?" Jenna took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping slightly. "We need to go into the woods behind your house. That's where it begins. That's where the shadows are strongest. But we have to go together." I exchanged a glance with Lila, who was still processing the whirlwind of revelations. "Are you sure?" I asked, the trepidation creeping back in. "What if it's dangerous?" "It is dangerous," Jenna replied, her voice serious. "But if we don't face it, it will consume us. We have to break the cycle." With a mix of dread and determination, I nodded. "Okay, let's do it." Lila hesitated for a moment, but then took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I'll do it. I can't let fear control me anymore." As we gathered our courage, I grabbed my flashlight and led the way into the darkness, Jenna and Lila flanking me. The familiar path to the woods felt different, the air thick with anticipation. The woods loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, but we pressed on, our hearts pounding in unison. Each step deeper into the forest felt like an act of defiance against the shadows that had haunted us for so long. "Stay close," I whispered, scanning the trees as if they might spring to life at any moment. The sound of our footsteps crunched against the fallen leaves, echoing in the stillness of the night. As we entered the woods, the air grew cooler, and the sense of being watched intensified. I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness held secrets that could either free us or trap us forever. With every step, I felt the weight of our past pressing down on us, a heavy reminder that the shadows we faced were not just external. They were born from our fears, our regrets, and the choices we had made. "Are you ready?" I asked, turning to Jenna and Lila, their expressions resolute yet tinged with anxiety. "Ready as I'll ever be," Jenna said, determination sparking in her eyes. Lila nodded, her jaw set. "Let's confront whatever it is." As we ventured deeper into the woods, I could sense the energy shifting around us. The air felt charged, alive with an unseen force, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something awaited us at the heart of the forest. The deeper we ventured into the woods, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the starlit sky, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, and every rustle of leaves sent a chill down my spine. It felt as if the very forest was alive, watching us, waiting for us to reach the heart of its darkness. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Lila whispered, glancing back nervously as the path we'd taken became less defined, the underbrush closing in around us. "It has to be," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Jenna said we need to find a clearing. Jenna walked slightly ahead, her movements fluid yet cautious. "Just a bit further," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Trust me, it's where I saw it last." I felt a surge of apprehension at the thought of whatever it might be. We had entered a realm of uncertainty, where the line between reality and nightmare blurred, and I couldn't help but wonder what awaited us. But I had made a promise to confront our fears, and I wasn't about to back down now. As we pushed through a thick cluster of bushes, we suddenly emerged into a small clearing bathed in moonlight. The glow illuminated an old, twisted tree at the center, its bark gnarled and cracked. It looked ancient, as if it had witnessed the passage of time itself, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. "This is it," Jenna said, stopping at the edge of the clearing, her gaze fixed on the tree. "This is where it all began." "What do you mean?" I asked, stepping closer. "This tree holds the energy of the forest," she explained. "It's a gateway between our world and whatever lies beyond. The darkness feeds off our fears, and it's been using this place to draw us in." Lila frowned, glancing around the clearing. "So, what do we do? Just stand here and wait for it to show up?" "No," Jenna replied, her tone firm. "We need to confront it directly. We have to take control of our fears and break the hold it has over us." I felt a lump form in my throat, the weight of her words sinking in. "But how do we do that?" "By acknowledging our pasts," Jenna said, her eyes narrowing in concentration. "We need to face the things we've hidden away, the regrets that keep us chained to the darkness. Only then can we reclaim our power." As we stood in the clearing, I couldn't help but think back to my own regrets, the mistakes I had made, the friendships I had lost. Each memory felt like a chain binding me to the shadows. I glanced at Lila, who looked equally pensive, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. "Okay," I said, my voice stronger now. "Let's do this." We formed a circle around the tree, our hands clasped together, drawing strength from one another. I could feel the energy in the air pulsating, as if the very ground beneath us vibrated with anticipation. "What do we do now?" I asked Jenna. "Close your eyes," she instructed. "Breathe deeply and focus on your fears. Let them rise to the surface." I complied, shutting my eyes and inhaling deeply. The darkness swirled in my mind, a tempest of insecurities and regrets that threatened to consume me. I felt Lila's hand squeeze mine, grounding me. We were in this together. As I focused on my past, memories flooded my mind. The friendships I had neglected, the opportunities one had missed, and the haunting voice of self-doubt that had plagued me for years. Each thought was a shard of glass, sharp and painful, but I knew I had to face them. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'm sorry for pushing you all away. I'm sorry for being afraid." A breeze swept through the clearing, rustling the leaves and sending a shiver down my spine. The temperature dropped suddenly, and I felt an icy presence encircle us, a palpable darkness that sought to drown out my voice. "Hold on," Jenna urged, her grip tightening around my hand. "We're stronger together." With her words echoing in my mind, I continued to confront my fears. "I will not be afraid anymore," I declared, my voice gaining strength. "I refuse to let you control me." Suddenly, the darkness pulsed around us, swirling like a storm, and I felt a cold rush of wind whip through the clearing. The shadows writhed and twisted, taking on forms that were all too familiar. Faces from my past, haunting my thoughts. Then, a voice broke through the cacophony, low and taunting. You think you can escape? You think you can just forget? My heart raced as I opened my eyes, facing the shadows that danced around us. No, I won't forget, but I won't let you define me either. The wind howled, and I felt the darkness surge toward me, but I stood my ground. I am more than my mistakes. I am not afraid of you. In that moment, a bright light erupted from the center of the tree, illuminating the clearing and casting the shadows aside. The darkness shrieked, a sound that reverberated through the air, as if my declaration had struck a blow against it. Keep going, Jenna urged, her voice fierce. You're breaking its hold. Lila's voice joined mine, filled with determination. I won't let my fears control me either. I'm stronger than that. Together, we formed a shield of light, our voices weaving together into a powerful force that pushed back against the darkness. The tree glowed brighter, pulsating with energy as we confronted the shadows of our past. As the light expanded, I felt the chains of fear begin to crumble, the weight lifting from my shoulders. The shadows screeched and writhed, retreating from the brilliant glow. With one final push, I shouted, I am reclaiming my life. You have no power over me. The darkness shrieked one last time before dissipating, swallowed by the light. The clearing fell silent, the air still and heavy with the aftermath of our confrontation. We stood there breathless, hearts pounding in the aftermath of our battle. The shadows had retreated, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a flicker of hope. As the glow from the tree faded, I looked at Jenna and Lila, their faces illuminated by the moonlight. We had faced the darkness together, and we had emerged stronger. But I knew this wasn't the end. The shadows might retreat for now, but they would always lurk at the edges of our lives, waiting for a moment of weakness. The key was not to let fear control us, but to confront it with courage and strength. Are you both okay? I asked, my voice still shaky. I think so, Lila replied, her expression softening. I feel lighter. Jenna nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and determination. We did it. We faced our fears. The forest around us felt different now, less menacing and more like a sanctuary. I knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but we had taken the first step toward reclaiming our lives. Let's go home, I said, my heart swelling with newfound hope. As we turned to leave the clearing, the path before us seemed clearer, the shadows less daunting. Together, we walked out of the woods, ready to face whatever came next. The journey back through the woods felt entirely different. What had once been an oppressive maze of shadows was now a path illuminated by our triumph. The morning light began to filter through the branches above, casting a warm, golden glow over the ground. It was as if the very forest celebrated our victory, shedding its cloak of darkness. As we emerged from the trees, the cool morning air filled my lungs, invigorating and fresh. I glanced at Lila and Jenna, both looking more alive than I had ever seen them. The lingering traces of fear that had once clouded our minds were slowly replaced by a growing sense of clarity and purpose. Can you believe we actually faced it? Lila asked, her voice filled with awe and disbelief. It feels surreal, I admitted, feeling a smile spread across my face. But we did it together. That made all the difference. Jenna nodded, her expression thoughtful. It's only the beginning, though. The darkness may return, but we've learned how to confront it. We know our strength now. As we reached the edge of the woods, the sun began to rise higher, illuminating the familiar sights of our neighborhood. The chirping of birds filled the air, and the world felt alive, vibrant, and full of possibilities. For the first time in a long while, hope flickered in my heart. However, that hope was swiftly tainted by a lingering dread. The realization hit me hard. Although we had faced our fears, the echoes of our encounter still resonated within me. I could feel the shadows lingering, whispering doubt in the back of my mind. Had we truly vanquished the darkness, Or would it simply bide its time until we were vulnerable again? Hey, Lila's voice cut through my thoughts, drawing my attention. What's on your mind? I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to voice my concerns. Just thinking about what happens next. The darkness is still out there, waiting for us to falter. Jenna stepped forward, her eyes locked onto mine. It's okay to feel that way. Fear isn't something we can just banish forever. It's about learning to coexist with it, understanding that it can't define who we are. Her words resonated with me. I had spent so long allowing fear to dictate my choices, but now I realized it was possible to acknowledge it without letting it control my life. Maybe we can help each other, Lila suggested, a small smile on her face. We can check in with one another, remind each other of our strength. Exactly, Jenna said, her tone encouraging. This is our pact, to stand together, no matter what challenges come our way. I felt a warmth spread through me at their words. Perhaps this was the way to navigate the darkness, by leaning on each other, forming a network of support that could withstand the storms ahead. As we walked back to our neighborhood, we made a silent promise to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that we were not alone. We would be vigilant, but we would also embrace the light that existed in our lives. Once we reached my house, a sense of normalcy washed over me. The front porch was just as I had left it, the morning sun casting playful shadows on the ground. For a moment, I allowed myself to revel in the simple comfort of home, a stark contrast to the chaos we had faced in the woods. Do you want to come inside? I asked, glancing at Lila and Jenna. Sure, Lila said, a grin breaking across her face. I could use a cup of coffee. Jenna laughed lightly, the sound easing the tension that still lingered. And I could use some breakfast. I think we've earned it. As we stepped inside, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The chaos of the past few days began to settle, replaced by a reassuring sense of safety. We moved through the familiar space, the walls adorned with memories that now felt like a shield against the darkness. As we gathered in the kitchen, I felt a shift in the air, an almost palpable sense of camaraderie enveloping us. We chatted and laughed, sharing stories and enjoying each other's company. The atmosphere was light, and for the first time in a long while I felt genuinely happy. But as the day wore on, an unsettling thought crept back into my mind. What if the darkness wasn't just an external force? What if it lived within us? I glanced at Lila and Jenna, their laughter echoing in the air, and realized that this was a moment to cherish. Even if the shadows loomed at the edges, we had created a sanctuary together, a space filled with light and love. After breakfast, we decided to take a walk around the neighborhood, soaking in the warmth of the sun and the vibrant colors of the world around us. The trees were lush with leaves, flowers bloomed in cheerful colors, and laughter echoed from children playing in the park. Life went on, and I felt a sense of connection to everything, the people, the trees, the sky. However, as we strolled down the street, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A figure stood at the edge of the woods, partially obscured by the trees. My heart raced, the sense of unease creeping back into my chest. Was it just a trick of the light, or was someone or something watching us? Did you see that? I whispered, stopping in my tracks. Lila and Jenna turned to look, but the figure had vanished, swallowed by the shadows of the trees. My heart raced, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. I think we need to be careful, I said, trying to shake off the sense of dread. What do you mean? Lila asked, concern etching her features. I saw someone in the woods, I replied, my voice shaking slightly. They were just standing there, watching us. Jenna's expression turned serious. We need to keep our eyes open. If there's something out there, we can't let it catch us off guard. With that, we picked up our pace, tension coiling in the air between us. The shadows of the woods seemed to stretch out longer, darker, and more ominous. It felt as though the forest was watching, waiting for us to return. As we rounded the corner, I couldn't shake the feeling that our confrontation with the darkness was far from over. It lingered like a specter in the distance, taunting us with its presence. But this time, we were ready. We had faced our fears, and we would not back down. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together, I promised, glancing at my friends. They nodded, determination gleaming in their eyes. The road ahead may be uncertain, but we had each other, and that was a force stronger than any darkness that might come our way. The atmosphere felt charged with an intensity one couldn't shake off as we continued our walk. The vibrant colors of the neighborhood seemed to pale against the backdrop of the forest, which loomed behind us like a dark veil. With every step, my pulse quickened, the memory of that figure etched vividly in my mind. Had we truly escaped the darkness, or was it merely waiting for the right moment to strike again? What do you think it was? Jenna asked, glancing back at the woods as if expecting something, or someone, to emerge. I don't know, I admitted, trying to keep my voice steady. But I felt like it was watching us. Lila shivered slightly, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. We were no longer just dealing with an internal fear. We were potentially facing something real and tangible. As we walked further down the street, I couldn't shake the sensation that eyes were on us, lurking just beyond the trees. We should probably head back, Lila suggested, her tone cautious. Maybe we need to regroup and figure out what to do next. Nodding in agreement, we turned around and made our way back toward my house. The familiar path now felt foreign, shrouded in an ominous cloud. I tried to push the creeping anxiety aside, reminding myself of the strength we had found together. But the weight of uncertainty lingered heavily in the air. Once back home, we settled into the living room, the bright sunlight streaming through the windows offering a stark contrast to the darkness that seemed to follow us. I made a pot of tea, the warmth of the kitchen grounding me as the kettle whistled. As I poured the steaming liquid into cups, I could sense that we were all still on edge. What do we do if we see that figure again? Lila asked, her eyes flickering to the window. We stand our ground, Jenna replied, her voice strong. We're not going to let fear dictate our lives. If it's back, we confront it. Her words resonated with me. After everything we had faced, it was time to reclaim our power. We had ventured into the dark woods, faced the horrors that lay within, and emerged stronger. Now is not the time to back down. Okay, I said, setting the cups on the table. Let's make a plan. We need to figure out what we're dealing with. If there's something out there, we'll be ready. We spent the next hour discussing various strategies, sharing ideas, and brainstorming ways to confront whatever was lurking in the shadows. It felt empowering to take control, to transform our fear into action. We agreed that we would need to return to the woods, but this time we would go prepared. As evening fell, a sense of determination filled the air. We gathered flashlights, a few tools for protection, and a portable speaker to use for sound. If we were going to confront the darkness, we would do it with courage and strategy. The three of us stepped out into the cool evening air, our flashlights piercing the growing gloom. The path into the woods felt both familiar and foreboding, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. With each step deeper into the forest, I felt the weight of uncertainty settle on my shoulders, but I knew I wasn't alone. Stick together, I reminded Lila and Jenna, my voice firm. We're stronger as a unit. As we ventured deeper into the woods, the air grew thick with tension. Every rustle of leaves and distant call of wildlife set my heart racing. But we pressed on, determination driving us forward. Suddenly, the woods grew eerily quiet, the familiar sounds of nature fading into silence. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I exchanged worried glances with my friends, the unease palpable in the air. Do you feel that? Jenna whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my heart pounding. It's like something is watching us. Just then, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. A shadow flickered between the trees, quick and elusive. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. There! Did you see that? Without hesitation, we turned our flashlights in the direction of the movement. The beam illuminated the underbrush, but there was nothing there. Only the rustling leaves and the chilling wind whispering through the trees. I think it's trying to lead us somewhere, Lila said, her voice shaky but resolute. We need to follow it, Against every instinct telling me to run, I nodded. Okay, let's go. We moved cautiously, following the elusive shadow deeper into the woods. Each step felt heavier, the tension mounting with every rustle of leaves. The shadows seemed to elongate around us, and for a moment, I could swear I heard breathing, a low, rasping sound that sent shivers down my spine. Is it just me, or is it getting colder? Jenna muttered, her breath visible in the dim light. It feels like it's closing in on us, I replied, trying to shake off the rising panic. But we have to keep going. We're so close. Suddenly, the shadow darted into a clearing ahead. I felt a surge of adrenaline as we approached the open space, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. In the center of the clearing stood an old, gnarled tree, its branches twisted like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. Beneath it lay a pile of stones, an odd arrangement that sent chills down my spine. It felt as if this place held secrets long buried and forgotten. What is this place? Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, I replied, stepping closer to the tree. But I think we're meant to find out. As we gathered around the stones, a cold wind swept through the clearing, rustling the leaves above. I could feel the weight of something ancient pressing down on us, an energy that both thrilled and terrified me. Do you think the figure is here? Jenna asked, scanning the darkness around us. Before I could respond, a chilling laugh echoed through the trees, reverberating off the bark and filling the air with an unsettling energy. I turned sharply, the flashlight beam dancing wildly as I searched for the source. Who's there? I called, my voice trembling. The laughter echoed again, closer this time, the sound rich with malice. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin as I gripped the flashlight tighter, my heart racing. Suddenly, the figure materialized from the shadows, tall and cloaked in darkness, its face obscured by the hood. The atmosphere shifted, the air heavy with dread. We've been waiting for you, it whispered, its voice a chilling caress that sent shivers down my spine. Who are you? I demanded, trying to summon my courage. The figure stepped closer, revealing a pair of piercing eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. You sought us out. You wanted to confront the shadows. And here we are. My breath hitched in my throat. What do you want from us? The figure tilted its head slightly, a hint of a smile curling its lips. You think you can banish us? You think you can escape the darkness? I exchanged glances with Lila and Jenna, fear gripping my heart. No one is trying to escape, I declared, my voice stronger than I felt. We're here to stand our ground. The figure chuckled, the sound echoing around us. You may stand, but the darkness is a part of you. It always will be. Embrace it. With those words, the air thickened, a palpable sense of despair washing over me. I felt the shadows closing in, the darkness whispering insidiously in my mind, threatening to consume me whole. No! I shouted, stepping forward defiantly. I won't let you take us. Lila and Jenna moved to my side, a united front against the encroaching darkness. We choose to fight, Jenna yelled, her voice ringing with determination. Together, Lila added, her eyes fierce. The figure paused, and for a brief moment, uncertainty flickered in its eyes. It was as if our collective will momentarily push back against the shadows, a light piercing through the encroaching darkness. Suddenly, the wind picked up, swirling around us as if responding to our defiance. The laughter faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. The figure took a step back, and the shadows retreated slightly, as if reconsidering their hold on us. You think you can resist? It hissed, its voice low and menacing. You are only delaying the inevitable. Maybe, I shot back, a newfound strength coursing through me. But we will face whatever comes our way together. You don't control us. With that declaration, the ground beneath us shook slightly, and the figure recoiled, its form wavering as if it were caught in a tempest. The shadows around us twisted and writhed, and I could feel the tension rising, but we stood our ground. I will not give in, I shouted, my heart pounding. This is our home. We will fight for it. The figure faltered, and the shadows began to dissipate, retreating into the forest like a fleeing nightmare. A sense of victory surged through me as the darkness lifted, revealing the clearing in all its eerie beauty. We did it. Jenna breathed, her eyes wide with disbelief. As the last remnants of the shadows faded away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. We had faced our fears, confronted the darkness that had haunted us, and emerged victorious together. But as we turned to leave the clearing, I couldn't help but glance back at the now empty space beneath the old tree. A flicker of doubt remained, a reminder that darkness can linger even when it seems vanquished. As we made our way back through the woods, I knew this wasn't the end. The shadows might return, but we had found our strength in unity. No matter what awaited us in the future, we were ready to face it one step at a time. The darkness would always be a part of us, but so would the light we carried within. And together, we would embrace both. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. The nights had always felt eerily quiet in my small suburban neighborhood, but it was a comfort I had grown to cherish. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I settled into a familiar routine. Dinner, a few episodes of my favorite show, and then curled up with a book or a movie until sleep beckoned. It was a simple existence, but one that felt secure until that fateful night when everything changed. It was an ordinary Wednesday. I finished a long day at work, looking forward to the peaceful solitude of my home. I made a quick dinner of pasta and garlic bread, the aroma filling the kitchen. After cleaning up, I settled onto the couch with a glass of wine and my favorite show, my mind drifting into the familiar stories and characters. The house was filled with the soft glow of the television, casting flickering shadows across the walls. I had always loved this quiet time alone. It was my escape from the chaos of the outside world. But as the night wore on, an inexplicable sense of unease began to seep into my consciousness. I brushed it off at first. Maybe it was just the wine or fatigue setting in. Yet, as the minutes ticked by, a nagging feeling gnawed at me, one that I couldn't quite shake. I glanced at the windows, the curtains drawn tightly against the darkened world outside, and felt a fleeting chill run down my spine. It was as if someone were watching me from beyond the glass, lurking in the shadows. Shaking my head, I forced myself to focus on the screen, but the feeling lingered. Every creak of the house seemed amplified, echoing through the stillness. I tried to distract myself, laughing at the characters on the screen, but my laughter felt hollow, drowned by the rising tide of anxiety. Just as I was about to dismiss my paranoia as mere imagination, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I reached for it, grateful for the distraction. It was a text from my friend Sarah, asking if I wanted to join her for brunch this weekend. I smiled, my tension easing momentarily as I typed a quick response. But as I hit send, something caught my eye, a fleeting shadow darting past the window. My heart skipped a beat. I leaned forward, peering through the curtains, my breath caught in my throat. The street outside was empty, the only sound the rustling leaves in the wind. It was nothing, I told myself, just a trick of the light. I settled back into the couch, trying to push aside the unease gnawing at my mind. I turned the volume up, but the tension in the air remained thick and suffocating. The feeling of being watched hung over me, pressing down like a heavy blanket. As the evening progressed, I couldn't shake the sensation. I decided to take a shower, hoping that the hot water would wash away my anxiety. Stepping into the steam-filled bathroom, I tried to clear my mind. But even as I stood under the cascading water, I felt an unsettling sensation, as if eyes were boring into me through the fog glass. Once I was done, I dried off and slipped into my pajamas. I was just about to crawl into bed when I heard it, a soft tapping sound coming from the living room. My heart raced, the chill returning as I crept toward the noise. I paused at the doorway, listening intently. It was silent now, but that soft tapping persisted, like fingernails scratching against wood. I stepped into the living room, every instinct urging me to turn on the lights and flood the space with brightness. But I hesitated, uncertainty gripping me. Gathering my courage, I flipped on the light switch. The sudden brightness illuminated the room, chasing away the shadows that had started to invade. I scanned the area, but everything appeared normal. My couch, my coffee table, my books strewn haphazardly around the room. Just as I began to convince myself I was being ridiculous, I noticed something on the window ledge. There, nestled between the curtain and the glass, was a small piece of paper. My stomach twisted into knots as I approached, apprehension clawing at my insides. I picked it up, my hands trembling slightly as I unfolded the note. The handwriting was messy, barely legible, but the message was clear. I see you. A cold wave of terror washed over me. It was impossible. No one could know my routines, my habits. I had always been careful, always aware of my surroundings. But now, the very thought that someone had been watching me for months sent chills racing down my spine. I stumbled back, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. How long had they been watching? What did they want from me? Panic surged through my veins as I scrambled to lock the doors, to barricade myself against the unknown. As I secured the last lock, the reality of the situation settled over me like a suffocating fog. I was not alone. Someone was out there, lurking just beyond the safety of my home, watching, waiting. But for what purpose? The night stretched on, and I knew this was only the beginning. My sense of security had been shattered, and the chilling realization hung over me like a dark cloud. I would need to uncover the truth, to confront whatever lurked in the shadows, and find out who had been watching me all this time. The hours dragged on like molasses, each tick of the clock echoing ominously in the silence of my home. I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching my phone as if it were a lifeline. I had texted Sarah, telling her about the note and my fear, but she hadn't responded yet. The comforting glow of the screen felt inadequate against the weight of my dread. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house sent adrenaline coursing through my veins, and every shadow seemed to dance menacingly against the walls. I took a deep breath, attempting to quell the rising tide of panic. I needed to think clearly to devise a plan. Was there a way to find out who was watching me? I grabbed my laptop, my fingers trembling as I opened it up. The screen lit up the room, pushing back the shadows momentarily. I scoured online forums for any advice on how to deal with stalkers or intrusive neighbors. The stories I read were chilling, but they also gave me a sense of camaraderie. I wasn't alone in my fears. I remembered that my neighbor, Mrs. Whitaker, had mentioned seeing someone loitering around the area a few weeks ago. Maybe she could provide some insight. I grabbed my jacket, my heart racing with each step as I made my way to her front porch. As I approached her house, I noticed the curtains were drawn tightly shut. I knocked hesitantly, the sound echoing in the quiet night. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing Mrs. Whitaker's familiar face, framed by her white curls. Her expression shifted from surprise to concern. "Oh dear, are you all right?" she asked, her eyes scanning my face for signs of distress. I think someone has been watching me," I blurted out, the words tumbling from my mouth before I could stop them. "I found this note on my window." I showed her the crumpled piece of paper. Mrs. Whitaker's expression darkened as she read the message. "That's unsettling. I did see someone hanging around here not too long ago. A man, I think. He was dressed in dark clothing and seemed out of place." My stomach dropped. What did he look like? Honestly, I couldn't see much. He was always lurking in the shadows, and when I tried to get a better look, he vanished. I nodded, dread pooling in my stomach. "Did you report it?" "No, dear, I didn't think much of it at the time. You know how it is. People come and go in this neighborhood, but now," she trailed off, concern etched in her features. "Now it feels different." I finished for her, my voice trembling. "I need to find out who he is." "Be careful," she warned, her voice low. "If you see anything suspicious, call the police. Don't confront anyone alone." I thanked her and returned home, the weight of her warning settling heavily on my shoulders. As I locked the door behind me, I considered my options. I could easily dismiss this as an isolated incident, but deep down, I knew that wouldn't be wise. My instinct screamed at me to take action, to unravel the mystery lurking at the edges of my life. Over the next few days, I became a creature of habit. I scoured the neighborhood, hoping to catch a glimpse of the shadowy figure Mrs. Whitaker had described. I meticulously noted any strange occurrences: cars parked too long, unfamiliar faces, odd sounds. I even set up a camera to record the front porch, convinced that it would provide some answers. Each night, I replayed the footage, my heart racing as I searched for any sign of movement. Hours turned into days, and as I sifted through the grainy footage, I began to feel a growing sense of dread. The knowledge that someone was watching me took root in my mind, poisoning my thoughts. One evening, as I replayed the footage, my heart skipped a beat. A figure appeared on the screen, hunched over and cloaked in darkness. I leaned closer, squinting at the monitor. It was difficult to make out any features, but I could see the figure shifting restlessly. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. Suddenly, the figure turned and glanced directly at the camera. My heart plummeted. Had they seen me? The footage cut off a few moments later, but the chilling image of that figure lingered in my mind. I rushed to the front window, peering through the curtains. The street was empty, bathed in the pale light of the street lamp. I felt like I was trapped in a horror movie, terrified, yet unable to look away from the screen. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, wide awake, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. I was filled with a sense of urgency, a desperate need to confront the situation. I couldn't let fear dictate my life. I needed to take control. The next morning, I resolved to visit the local police station. It was time to report everything: the note, the figure, the anxiety that had taken over my life. As I walked through the neighborhood, the familiar streets felt foreign. Every sound magnified, every glance sending shivers down my spine. When I arrived at the station, I was met with a friendly officer, but my story quickly shifted from casual conversation to grave concern. "It sounds like you're dealing with something serious," Officer Ramirez said, nodding thoughtfully as I recounted the events. "We'll take your report seriously. Have you considered installing additional security measures? Cameras, lights? It's always good to be proactive." I nodded, grateful for his support. "I've already set up some cameras, but I think I need to do more." "Good idea. Let's keep a lookout for anyone suspicious, and if you notice anything, don't hesitate to call us. Remember, you're not alone in this." As I left the station, a sense of resolve washed over me. I would not allow fear to control me. I was determined to uncover the truth and reclaim my life. But little did I know, the shadows were only just beginning to unveil their secrets. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the streets, I felt a shiver of anticipation and dread course through me. That night, I was determined to put my newfound resolve to the test. Armed with my phone, a flashlight, and a relentless sense of purpose, I planned to stay awake, keeping vigil against the encroaching darkness. I settled into my living room, positioning myself near the window where I could see the street clearly. The glow of my laptop lit up the room, and I kept the camera feed running, capturing every moment. Each tick of the clock seemed to amplify the silence around me, every creak of the house reverberating like a distant whisper of something lurking just out of sight. The initial adrenaline rush began to fade, replaced by a growing unease. I sipped on a cup of tea, the warmth grounding me as I focused on the empty street. The world outside transformed into a tapestry of shadows, the soft rustling of leaves amplifying the quiet. I tried to occupy my mind, scrolling through the latest news and keeping tabs on my social media, but nothing could distract me from the gnawing fear settling in my gut. Hours passed, and just when I thought the night would surrender to mundane boredom, I caught a flicker of movement outside. My heart raced as I squinted through the window, straining to see what or who was out there. The street lamp flickered erratically, casting shifting shadows that danced ominously. Then I saw him. The figure stood at the far end of the street, just outside the halo of light cast by the street lamp. He was dressed in dark clothing, his posture slightly hunched as if he were trying to blend into the shadows. My breath hitched in my throat, and I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. It was the same silhouette I had glimpsed in the camera footage. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed the police. My voice trembled as I reported the suspicious individual lurking in my neighborhood, each word feeling like a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. "Yes, there's a man outside. I think he's been watching me," I said, my heart pounding in my ears. "Stay inside and keep your doors locked," the officer instructed calmly. "We'll send someone over right away." I hung up, feeling a mix of relief and dread. My mind raced with 1,000 possibilities. What did he want? Why was he here? I was a sitting duck in my own home, vulnerable and exposed. As I tried to focus on my breathing, I watched the figure shift slightly. He glanced around, scanning the neighborhood with an unsettling intensity. My blood ran cold when I realized he was looking in my direction, and the flashlight beam illuminated the curtain just enough to hint at my presence. I dropped to the floor, pressing my back against the wall, the phone still clutched tightly in my hand. My heart thundered, and I could feel the pulse in my ears, drowning out the outside world. Time seemed to stretch infinitely as I waited, each passing second taunting me with the uncertainty of what would happen next. Suddenly, there was a knock at my door, sharp and demanding. I flinched, every nerve ending on high alert. "Police! Open up!" The voice was gruff, echoing through the stillness. With cautious movements, I crawled to the door, looking through the peephole. 2 officers stood outside, their silhouettes illuminated by the street lamp. I hesitated for a moment, the anxiety bubbling up inside me, but I knew I had to let them in. I opened the door, relief washing over me as they stepped inside. "Are you all right?" one of the officers asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "I saw him," I exclaimed, my voice trembling. "He was standing outside, just watching." "Where?" the other officer asked, scanning the room for any signs of disturbance. "Out there." I pointed towards the window, my pulse quickening. "He was right there, but he must have seen you coming because he's gone now." The officers exchanged glances, a hint of concern flickering in their eyes. "We'll check the area. Stay inside, and don't open the door for anyone else," one of them instructed. As they stepped back out into the night, I felt a mixture of vulnerability and gratitude. I paced my living room, anxiety gnawing at my mind. Had I made a mistake by reporting the man? What if he retaliated? My thoughts spiraled, feeding into the fear that had taken root within me. Moments felt like hours as I anxiously awaited their return. My mind replayed every encounter I'd had in the past few days. The note, the shadow, the growing sense of dread that shadowed my every step. It felt like I was living in a nightmare, one where the lines between reality and fear blurred dangerously. Just then, my phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a notification from my camera feed. I rushed to check it, my heart pounding in anticipation. The video played back, revealing the empty street. No sign of the figure. Just as I was about to turn away, something caught my eye. A shape materialized from the shadows, a figure slipping into view from behind the tree at the edge of my yard. My heart dropped. The man! I leaned closer, my breath hitching as I watched him move cautiously towards my front porch. Panic surged through me. What is he doing? I whispered to myself, dread tightening around my throat. Suddenly, the officers returned, their expressions grave. "We didn't find anyone in the area," one of them said, glancing toward the window. "But if he comes back, call us immediately." Just then, the figure stepped into the light of the porch. The officers froze, their eyes narrowing as they turned to face the window. "Stay back," one officer warned, taking a step toward the door. As the man raised his hand, something glimmered, a blade, catching the light of the porch lamp. I gasped, my heart racing as the officers sprang into action, one rushing toward the door and the other pulling out his radio. The figure turned to flee, but it was too late. The officers were fast on their feet, chasing after him as I clutched the wall, breathless and terrified. The night erupted into chaos, shouts, footsteps pounding on pavement, and my heart thundering in my chest. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear what was happening outside. The commotion continued for what felt like an eternity, before finally settling into a tense silence. The officers returned, their faces flushed with adrenaline. "We lost him in the alley," one of them reported, frustration etched on his features. "But we'll increase patrols in the area. You did the right thing by calling us." I nodded, still in shock. The gravity of the situation pressed heavily on my chest. "What if he comes back?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We'll be watching," the officer reassured me. "But for now, it's best to stay alert and avoid being alone at night." As they left, the weight of their words lingered in the air. I locked the door, ensuring every bolt was secure, my mind racing with the implications of what had just transpired. I needed to find a way to reclaim my sense of safety, to confront this fear that had invaded my life. That night, sleep eluded me as I replayed every detail in my mind. The figure, the chase, the uncertainty of who he was and what he wanted. I resolved to dig deeper, to uncover the truth behind the shadows that loomed over my life. And I would not rest until I found out who was watching me and why. The dawn of the next day broke slowly, casting a soft light through my bedroom window, but it did little to alleviate the fear that still clung to me like a second skin. I sat up in bed, feeling the remnants of a sleepless night weighing heavily on my eyelids. The memory of the night before replayed in vivid detail in my mind. The shadowy figure, the officer's frantic chase, and the nagging question of who he was and why he had been watching me. Determined to take back control of my life, I decided that the time for passivity was over. I needed answers, and I needed them now. As I made my way downstairs, the mundane sounds of my home felt foreign and unsettling. Each creak of the floorboards echoed my anxiety, and I hesitated at the sight of the front door, half expecting the man to be waiting on the other side. I grabbed my laptop and settled at the kitchen table, poring over the details of the previous days. My phone buzzed beside me, a text from my neighbor Marissa. "Are you okay? I heard some noise last night. Everything all right?" I hesitated before responding. I didn't want to alarm her further, but I also felt the need to reach out. "I'm fine. Just had a strange incident. Thanks for checking in." I hit send, then turned my attention back to the screen. I opened a new browser tab and began searching for any incidents or reports of strange activity in my neighborhood. As I scrolled through various local news articles, I stumbled upon a piece from a few weeks prior about a series of unsettling reports in nearby neighborhoods. Unexplained figures lurking near homes, odd noises, and in one case, a man who had been found lurking in a backyard. My heart raced as I read through the details. It seemed like a pattern was emerging, one that suggested I wasn't the only person experiencing this nightmare. I jotted down notes and details, connecting the dots as best I could. Maybe this was not just a random occurrence. Perhaps there was a larger story at play. I needed to dig deeper. The doorbell rang, and I jumped, my heart racing. I walked cautiously to the door, peeking through the peephole. It was Marissa, looking concerned and a little frazzled. I opened the door, forcing a smile. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "What's up?" "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said last night," she admitted, stepping inside. "I thought maybe we could talk about it. I want to make sure you're safe." I nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for her kindness. "Thanks, I appreciate that. I've been trying to figure out what's going on." We moved to the living room, and I recounted the events of the previous night, the figure, the chase, and my fears. Marissa listened intently, her expression shifting from concern to disbelief as I detailed the strange happenings in the neighborhood. "Do you think it's connected to those reports?" she asked, furrowing her brow. "I think it has to be," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. "There's something more happening here. It's not just me." Marissa frowned, looking thoughtful. "Maybe we should go talk to some of the neighbors. See if anyone else has noticed anything strange." I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to open the floodgates of fear. But I knew she was right. "Yeah, let's do that." We grabbed our jackets and stepped outside, the crisp morning air filling my lungs. It felt refreshing yet eerie, as if the world around us was holding its breath, waiting for the next ominous event to unfold. We made our way down the street, knocking on the doors of several neighbors. Most were quick to dismiss our concerns, chalking up the disturbances to the usual sounds of the night. But one elderly woman, Mrs. Henderson, surprised us both. She opened the door with wide eyes and an anxious expression. "Oh, I've been hearing things too," she exclaimed, her voice quivering. "I thought I was just imagining it. Every night, it sounds like someone is moving around outside. Right outside my window." "Exactly," I said, my heart racing at the validation. "And there's been this figure, someone lurking around. Have you seen anyone?" Mrs. Henderson shook her head, her hands wringing together anxiously. "No, but I have a feeling something isn't right. I've lived here for over 30 years, and I've never felt so uneasy." As we continued our rounds, more neighbors began to share their own experiences. Odd noises, flickering lights, and even glimpses of shadowy figures at night. Each story fed into the growing web of unease, creating a tapestry of shared fear that connected us all. With every revelation, my resolve grew stronger. I couldn't just sit back and wait for the unknown to invade my life further. I needed to find out who was behind this and put an end to it. As we returned to my house, a plan began to form in my mind. "I think we should set up a watch," I suggested to Marissa. "We can take turns keeping an eye out at night. If there's something going on, we'll be ready." She nodded, her determination matching mine. "Let's create a neighborhood watch. We can get everyone involved and make sure we're all safe." We spent the rest of the day drafting a flyer, inviting everyone in the neighborhood to meet that evening to discuss our concerns and come up with a plan. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The night would be our first chance to confront the shadows that haunted our street. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and waited for the gathering to begin. My heart raced as I considered the night ahead. Would we uncover the truth, or would the darkness continue to watch us? As twilight deepened, the atmosphere around my house shifted. The streetlights flickered to life, casting elongated shadows on the pavement, and I felt a sense of foreboding creep into my bones. Neighbors began to trickle in, their faces marked by concern and curiosity, each one of us bonded by the chilling sense of being watched. Marissa and I set up chairs in my living room, arranging them in a circle to foster open communication. I could feel the tension in the air as we discussed our experiences, each account more unsettling than the last. It was cathartic yet terrifying, giving voice to the fears we had kept bottled up. As we shared stories, I noticed Mrs. Henderson's hands trembling. "I remember when my husband was alive," she said, her voice wavering. "He always said that if something feels off, it usually is." I didn't believe him until now. Others nodded in agreement, their expressions serious. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that we had all been feeling the weight of something ominous lurking in the shadows. "What should we do?" one neighbor asked, his brow furrowed with worry. "I don't want to live in fear." "We need to watch," I asserted, my voice steady despite the fluttering in my chest. "We'll take turns keeping an eye on our street. If we see anything unusual, we need to call the police immediately. And if it comes to it, we'll confront whoever is causing this." The group murmured in agreement, some expressing their concerns about safety, while others voiced their frustrations over the situation. Marissa and I assigned shifts for the next few nights, everyone volunteering to participate. As the evening wore on, we settled into a sense of camaraderie, a shared determination binding us. I felt bolstered by their presence, but the gnawing anxiety remained. What if we weren't just being paranoid? What if there truly was someone or something watching us? By the time we disbanded, the night had fully descended, leaving the street cloaked in darkness, illuminated only by the flickering streetlights. My heart raced as I turned off the last of the house lights, plunging myself into near-complete darkness. I made my way to my bedroom, acutely aware of every creak in the floorboards, every rustle outside my window. That first night of the watch felt agonizingly long. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to quiet the multitude of thoughts racing through my mind. I listened intently to the sounds of the night, the wind rustling the trees, the distant howl of a dog, the occasional rumble of a car driving by. But underneath those normal sounds, I felt an unsettling silence that hinted at something lurking just beyond my perception. Around midnight, I heard a soft rustling noise outside my window, and my heart leaped into my throat. I slipped out of bed and crept to the window, peeking through the curtains. My breath caught. I scanned the yard, straining to see anything amiss. There was nothing but the shadows playing tricks on my mind, but my gut told me that wasn't the case. I opened the window slightly to listen more closely. The sound came again, a faint whispering, almost like someone was conversing with themselves. My pulse quickened as I considered the possibility that someone was indeed out there. I grabbed my phone, ready to call Marissa, when suddenly the whispering stopped. Silence enveloped the night, stretching out like a dark blanket, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I leaned closer to the window, my eyes darting around the yard, desperate to catch a glimpse of whatever had made that noise. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling despite my efforts to sound brave. No answer, just silence. I felt ridiculous for shouting into the void, but a part of me hoped that maybe, just maybe, it would startle whoever it was into revealing themselves. My grip tightened on the window frame, and I took a deep breath, readying myself to close it and retreat back into the safety of my room. Just as I was about to turn away, a shadow flitted across the yard, brief but unmistakable. My heart raced, and adrenaline surged through my veins. I opened the window wider, my breath coming in short gasps. The shadow seemed to move towards my neighbor's house, disappearing from view. I hesitated, debating whether to go after it or stay put. Instinct told me to call for help, but curiosity gnawed at me. What if it was just a harmless passerby? Or worse, what if it was the very figure that had been haunting my nights? Against my better judgment, I slipped on my shoes, grabbed a flashlight, and quietly crept out of my house. The cool night air hit my skin, sending chills down my spine. I walked cautiously towards the direction where I had seen the shadow, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. "Marissa," I whispered loudly, hoping she was still awake. "Are you there?" The answer came in the form of a soft, rustling sound nearby. I froze, gripping the flashlight tightly. The noise was followed by a low, deliberate breath that echoed through the darkness. I turned the flashlight on, illuminating the path ahead. The beam cut through the darkness like a knife, and I scanned the area around me. The stillness felt heavy, almost suffocating, and my instinct screamed at me to turn back. But then, just ahead, I caught a glimpse of movement again, something just beyond the trees at the edge of my yard. My heart raced as I stepped closer, the beam of light wavering in my shaking hand. "Who's there?" I called out again, louder this time, my voice breaking the silence. Then I saw it. A figure stood partially hidden among the trees, its back turned to me. I blinked in disbelief, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "Hello," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure turned slowly, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a man, his face partially obscured by the shadows, but I could see the glint of something in his eyes that made my skin crawl. "What do you want?" I managed to stammer, my instincts screaming at me to run. The man didn't respond immediately. He simply stood there, a chilling stillness enveloping him, as if he was deciding what to do next. My mind raced, weighing my options. Should I confront him or retreat back to safety? Suddenly, he took a step forward and my flight instinct kicked in. I turned on my heel and sprinted back towards my house, heart pounding in my ears. I burst through the door, slamming it behind me and locking it with shaking hands. My mind whirled as I pressed my back against the door, trying to catch my breath. I felt like I had narrowly escaped something terrible, but the terror was far from over. As I stood there, fear coursing through me, I realized I could no longer ignore the reality of the situation. The man was out there, watching me, lurking in the shadows. And now I had to figure out what to do next. The adrenaline pumping through my veins made it hard to think straight. I leaned against the front door, my heart still racing as I listened for any sounds from outside. Had he followed me? Was he still lurking in the shadows? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted, and I needed to take action. I glanced at my phone, the screen lighting up in the dimness of the room. I had missed several calls from Marissa and a few messages from concerned neighbors. I quickly opened the messages, hoping to find some reassurance. "Are you okay?" One read. "We're worried. Did you see something?" I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. I had to tell them what happened. I typed a quick reply. "I saw someone outside. I'm okay, but I need help. Can we meet?" I hit send and waited, pacing the living room as the minutes ticked by. Finally, my phone buzzed with a response from Marissa. "We'll be at your place in 10 minutes. Just stay inside." I felt a flicker of relief. I wasn't alone in this. I had my neighbors, and together we could confront whatever terror had come into our lives. But that relief quickly faded as I remembered the figure standing in the shadows. Who was he? What did he want? I glanced out the window again, the curtains drawn slightly apart. The yard looked normal. Nothing but the whispering trees and the stillness of the night. But the darkness felt heavier than before. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched. Deciding I couldn't stay idle, I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously opened the door to peer outside. I stepped onto the porch, shining the beam around the yard. Nothing moved, but as I scanned the edges of the trees, my pulse quickened again. I stepped down onto the grass, every sense heightened, straining to hear any signs of movement. The wind rustled the leaves, but it was the unsettling silence that clawed at my mind. I turned off the flashlight, wanting to listen. The absence of sound was deafening. My thoughts raced back to the figure and his cold, glinting eyes. What had he wanted from me? A rustle broke the silence, and my heart nearly stopped. I whipped around, the flashlight illuminating the darkened corner of the yard, but I saw nothing, just shadows dancing in the wind. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, shaking my head to clear my thoughts. I couldn't let fear take over. I needed to be brave, to confront whatever was happening. Just then, headlights cut through the darkness as Marissa's car pulled up in front of my house. I rushed to the door, relief flooding through me as I opened it wide to greet her and the others. "Did you see him?" Marissa asked, worry etched across her face. I nodded, leading them into the living room. "He was standing over there by the trees," I said, pointing toward the yard. I didn't get a good look at him, but he felt wrong. Mrs. Henderson sat on the edge of the couch, her eyes wide with fear. "What if he comes back? What if he knows we're here?" I felt the weight of their anxiety pressing down on me. "We need to come up with a plan. I think we should search the perimeter of the neighborhood together. We can't let him intimidate us." Marissa glanced at the others, her expression thoughtful. "I agree, but we should stick together. If he's dangerous, we need to keep our eyes open. No one should be alone." We all nodded in agreement, a sense of unity forming among us. As we gathered flashlights and prepared to head outside, I could feel the tension coiling in the air. With a deep breath, I led the group out into the night. We formed a loose circle, shining our lights into the trees and calling out occasionally, hoping to flush out any lurking presence. As we walked down the street, I felt a mix of fear and determination. This was my home, and I wasn't going to let a shadowy figure take that away from me. We reached the edge of the neighborhood and decided to spread out, but not too far. I took the lead, scanning the darkness, my heart racing with every sound. Every rustle felt amplified in the stillness. Every breath sounded ominous. Then, just as we were nearing the woods at the back of my house, I heard a faint whispering again. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. "Did you hear that?" I whispered urgently, turning to the group. They nodded, eyes wide with fear. The whispering grew louder, more distinct. It was as if someone was calling to me, beckoning me forward into the shadows. "Stay close," I instructed, my voice barely above a whisper. We crept toward the sound, the beam of our flashlights bouncing erratically over the ground. The closer we got, the more palpable the tension became, a thick blanket of dread hanging over us. As we reached the edge of the woods, the whispering stopped abruptly. An eerie silence descended, and I felt a chill sweep through me. "What do we do now?" Marissa asked, her voice trembling slightly. I peered into the darkness, willing myself to step forward. "We look for the source," I replied, trying to sound braver than I felt. The group moved cautiously into the woods, our flashlights slicing through the darkness. The air grew colder, and the trees loomed overhead like silent sentinels. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the woods, and we all froze. "What was that?" Mrs. Henderson whispered, her eyes wide with panic. Before I could respond, a figure dashed through the trees, barely illuminated by our flashlights. My heart raced as I caught a glimpse of the familiar silhouette. "The man! He's here!" I yelled, my voice filled with terror as I turned to run. The others followed suit, sprinting back toward the safety of the street. We burst out of the woods, gasping for breath as we reached the open space. "He was right there," I panted, trying to catch my breath. "We need to call the police." Marissa pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed. I glanced back toward the woods, my heart pounding as I waited for the response. "Please, just hurry," I pleaded, the reality of the situation crashing down on me. As I stood there, a thought crossed my mind. What if the man was watching us? What if he was still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike? We regrouped on the street, and I felt a mix of fear and urgency surge through me. We couldn't let this continue. We had to confront this darkness head on. "Listen," I said, looking each of them in the eye. "We're going to take a stand. No more running. We'll stay together and watch for him. If he shows up again, we'll call the police, but we won't let fear dictate our lives." Nods of agreement followed, and I felt a newfound resolve settle in the pit of my stomach. Whatever was haunting us, we would face it together. The night had settled heavily around us, the moon casting an eerie glow over the street as we huddled together, waiting for the police. My heart pounded in my chest, a persistent reminder of the terror that had intruded into my life. I could still feel the adrenaline coursing through me, but beneath it lay a creeping exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that threatened to pull me under. As we waited, the shadows seemed to lengthen, creeping closer as if they were alive. I fought against the urge to look back toward the woods, where I had seen him vanish into the darkness. Instead, I focused on my friends, trying to ground myself in the present. Marissa was pacing nervously, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, while Mrs. Henderson leaned against her car, her face pale. "What if he comes back?" Mrs. Henderson whispered, her voice quaking with fear. "What if he's already here?" I shook my head, trying to quell my own rising panic. "We're not going to let him intimidate us. We've faced him once, and we can do it again." Marissa nodded, though her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. "We just need to stay alert. The police will be here soon. They'll help us." As if on cue, the sound of sirens pierced the silence, growing louder as they approached. A surge of relief washed over me, and I felt the tension in my body ease slightly. The flashing lights lit up the street, illuminating the shadows that had felt so oppressive moments before. The police car came to a stop, and two officers stepped out, their expressions serious as they surveyed the scene. I stepped forward, trying to appear calm despite the chaos swirling in my mind. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We saw a man lurking around my house. He's been watching us. Can you describe him?" One of the officers asked, his brow furrowing as he took notes. I thought back to the figure, the way he had blended into the darkness, his silhouette barely distinguishable. He was tall, with dark hair, and he wore a jacket. I couldn't see his face clearly, but he felt threatening. The officers exchanged glances, and I could sense their unease. "We'll take a look around," the other officer said, his tone reassuring. "Stay close to your friends. We'll do our best to find him." As they moved toward the woods, I felt a mix of hope and anxiety. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the chance to finally confront the nightmare that had invaded my life. But as I stood there, watching them disappear into the shadows, a chill ran down my spine. What if he wasn't just lurking? What if he had plans? Minutes felt like hours as we waited, the silence stretching between us. Marissa glanced at me, her expression tense. "Do you really think they'll find him?" "I hope so," I replied, though doubt gnawed at my thoughts. The reality of our situation felt suffocating. Suddenly, one of the officers returned, a grim look on his face. "We didn't find anyone in the woods, but we'll continue to patrol the area." If you see or hear anything suspicious, call us immediately. I nodded, but a sense of unease settled in my stomach. I wanted to believe we were safe now, but the uncertainty was like a weight on my shoulders. Can we come with you? Marissa asked, her voice trembling slightly. We don't want to be left alone. The officer hesitated, but eventually nodded. All right, but stay close. We'll keep you safe. As we moved together through the neighborhood, I felt an odd mix of relief and dread. The officers led the way, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as we walked in a tight group. But as we approached the edge of the woods, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. The air grew colder, and an unsettling tension hung in the air. I glanced back at the officers, who exchanged a concerned look, their senses clearly heightened. Stay alert, one of them instructed, scanning the shadows. We'll check the perimeter of the trees. The sound of rustling leaves echoed in the silence, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I forced myself to focus, to remain calm. We were no longer helpless. We had the police with us. As we walked along the tree line, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a fleeting shadow darting between the trees. My heart raced as I turned my head, but it was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Did you see that? I whispered to Marissa, who stood beside me, her eyes wide. I did, she replied, her voice barely audible. What was it? Before I could answer, one of the officers raised a hand, signaling for us to stop. Did anyone hear that? He asked, his expression suddenly serious. I strained to listen, my breath hitching in my throat. There it was again, faint, almost imperceptible, like a whisper carried by the wind. It sounded almost like a name. Who's there? The officer called out, his voice echoing into the shadows. A heavy silence settled around us, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. The whispers continued, faint but insistent, weaving through the trees like a malevolent melody. Let's move back, the officer said, his voice steady despite the tension. We'll call for backup. As we retreated to the street, I felt a growing sense of desperation. I needed to know what was happening. I needed to confront this fear. Let's go back to my house, I said, determination hardening my resolve. We can regroup and figure out our next steps. The group nodded, and we hurried back toward the safety of my home. As we crossed the threshold, I felt a flicker of hope. I couldn't let this darkness take over my life. Inside, we gathered in the living room, the warmth of the lights offering a false sense of security. But the whispers still echoed in my mind, haunting and relentless. We can't just wait here, I said, glancing at the others. We need to take control. We need to find out what's really going on. Marissa exchanged a worried glance with Mrs. Henderson. But how? We don't know who he is or what he wants. We start by investigating, I said, my voice firm. We need to uncover the truth behind these disturbances. It's the only way we'll find peace. As I spoke, I felt a flicker of courage ignite within me. I was done being afraid. It was time to confront the darkness head on. The atmosphere in the living room was thick with anticipation as we sat in a circle, our faces illuminated by the soft glow of the lamp. I could sense the apprehension radiating from my friends, but beneath it, there was a flicker of determination. We had all experienced the terror of being watched, of feeling like pawns in someone else's twisted game. Now, it was time to take control. Okay, I began, my voice steady despite the tension in the air. We need to figure out who this man is and why he's been watching us. Marissa, you mentioned something about the old house on Maple Street. Maybe we should start there. Marissa nodded, her brow furrowed in thought. I've heard rumors that it's been abandoned for years. People say it's haunted, but what if there's more to it? What if he's somehow connected to that place? I could feel the adrenaline pulsing through my veins as I considered her words. The old house had always loomed large in our imaginations, a place of whispers and dark tales. If the man watching us had ties to it, then it was the key to unraveling this mystery. Mrs. Henderson spoke up, her voice a tremor of worry. You kids should be careful. It's not just the man you have to worry about. There could be other dangers in that house. But we can't let fear hold us back, I replied, my determination growing stronger. We need to know what we're dealing with. If he's been watching us, he might be hiding something there. We have to face this head on. After a moment of silence, Marissa finally nodded. Okay, let's do it. But we should go prepared. We'll need flashlights, and I'll grab my camera. As we gathered our supplies, a sense of urgency filled the air. We weren't just going to the old house. We were stepping into the unknown, ready to confront the darkness that had invaded our lives. Once we had everything, we piled into Mrs. Henderson's car, a tight knot of anxiety and anticipation forming in my stomach. The night had deepened, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer as we drove toward Maple Street. Arriving at the old house, I felt a chill run down my spine. The structure loomed ahead, its windows dark and empty, like the hollow eyes of a skull. It had been a long time since anyone had ventured here, and now, with the weight of our purpose, the air felt charged, almost electric. As we stepped out of the car, the crunch of gravel beneath our feet echoed in the stillness. Are we sure about this? Marissa whispered, glancing back at the car. We have to be, I said firmly. Let's stick together. No matter what happens, we face it as a team. With flashlights in hand, we approached the front door, which hung slightly ajar. The hinges creaked ominously as we pushed it open, revealing a dark hallway filled with dust and shadows. Inside, the air was stale, and the floorboards groaned beneath our weight. The faint smell of mildew and decay hung in the air, but we pressed on, hearts pounding in unison. Each step felt like a challenge, a confrontation with the unknown. Let's check the living room first, I suggested, leading the way. We crept into the room, our flashlights sweeping across the walls, illuminating peeling wallpaper and scattered debris. It was eerily quiet, the silence amplifying the sound of our breathing. Suddenly, Marissa gasped, pointing to a small table in the corner. Look, there, resting on the dusty surface, was an old photograph. I moved closer, and my heart dropped as I recognized the faces in the picture. It was me, Marissa, and a group of friends from years ago, except there was one more person. A shadowy figure stood behind us, partially obscured, but unmistakably present. The man. My blood ran cold as I realized this wasn't just a random encounter. He had been in our lives long before we even knew it. Who is he? Marissa whispered, her voice barely above a breath. I don't know, I replied, my voice shaking. But we need to find out. Determined, we continued our exploration of the house. As we moved through the dimly lit corridors, I could feel the oppressive weight of the past pressing down on us. It felt as if the walls themselves were watching, their secrets hidden just beneath the surface. In one of the bedrooms, we stumbled upon an old diary, its pages yellowed and fragile. I opened it cautiously, my heart racing as I scanned the faded handwriting. It belonged to someone named Clara, and as I read, a chilling story unfolded, one that connected our lives to this house in ways I never imagined. Clara wrote about her life, her hopes, and the man who had become obsessed with her. The entries grew more frantic, detailing strange occurrences and a growing sense of paranoia. It was as if she had foreseen our own nightmare, warning us from the past. He was always watching. I read aloud, my voice trembling. I can feel his presence. I don't know how much longer I can stay here. I could feel the weight of the diary's contents settling over us, heavy with the implications. This was not just a haunted house. It was a place of trauma, a shrine to the horrors of the past. As I turned to the next page, a noise echoed through the house, a faint whisper that seemed to call my name. I froze, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. Did you hear that? I whispered, my heart racing. The others nodded, fear etched on their faces. It came from the attic, Marissa said, her voice shaking. We have to check it out, I said, though my voice wavered with uncertainty. We're so close to uncovering the truth. We made our way up the creaking stairs, each step feeling like a descent into darkness. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling the air with an overwhelming sense of dread. As we reached the attic door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the knob. This is it, I said, swallowing hard. Whatever happens next, we face it together. With that, I pushed the door open, revealing the attic's shadowy interior. The air was thick with dust, and the moonlight streaming through the small window illuminated the room in an eerie glow. And there, in the center of the room, was a figure shrouded in darkness. I gasped, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized it was him, the man who had been watching me. He turned slowly, his face obscured by shadows, but I could feel his gaze boring into me. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice low and cold. I stepped back, fear gripping my heart, but then I remembered Clara's words, the warnings from the past. "Why have you been watching us?" I demanded, my voice shaking but resolute. He laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You think you could just walk in and demand answers? This isn't just a game, girl. You've uncovered something far beyond your understanding." "What do you mean?" I pressed, trying to keep my voice steady, but instead of answering, he moved closer, the darkness around him shifting like smoke. "You don't know what you've awakened. You've disturbed a world that was meant to stay hidden." I could feel panic rising within me, but I pushed it down. "We're not afraid of you. We'll expose you for what you really are." He chuckled softly, the sound echoing eerily in the confined space. "You think you can expose me? You don't even know who I am." In that moment, everything clicked into place. The whispers, the shadows, the overwhelming feeling of being watched. It all pointed back to this man, to the darkness he represented. "We know more than you think," I said, my voice gaining strength. "We're not going to let you control our lives anymore." As I spoke, I felt a surge of energy coursing through me, a defiance that was unfamiliar yet powerful. It was as if Clara's spirit was with me, guiding me through this confrontation. The man paused, his expression shifting as he regarded me with something akin to respect. "You're braver than I thought, but bravery alone won't save you." "Maybe not," I shot back, "but we won't be intimidated. We're going to reclaim our lives." Suddenly, a blinding light erupted from the window, illuminating the attic. I squinted, shielding my eyes, and when I looked back, the man was gone, vanished in a thin air, as if he had never existed. My heart raced as I processed what had just happened. Did we drive him away?" I asked, breathless. "I think we did," Marissa whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. We stood in the attic, the tension slowly dissipating as reality settled around us. We had faced our fear, confronted the darkness, and somehow emerged stronger. "I can't believe it's over," I said, disbelief flooding my voice. "But we need to make sure he doesn't come back." "We will," Mrs. Henderson assured us, her expression determined. "We'll tell the police everything we found here. They need to know." As we left the attic, a sense of relief washed over me. We had uncovered the truth and confronted the nightmare that had invaded our lives. Together, we would ensure that the darkness would no longer have power over us. As we descended the stairs, the attic felt lighter, almost liberated from the oppressive darkness that had clung to it. Each creaking step echoed in the silence, a reminder of what we had just faced and what we had yet to do. Outside, the night air was cool and refreshing, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the house. We stepped out into the open air, the moon hanging high above us, casting a silver glow over everything. My heart still raced, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I tried to process the events of the evening. Marissa and Mrs. Henderson stood beside me, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and relief. "I can't believe we actually confronted him," Marissa said, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought we were done for." Mrs. Henderson placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You are all incredibly brave, but we need to make sure this is truly over. We can't let our guard down." I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "You're right. We need to report everything we found to the police. They need to know about the man and the connection to Clara's diary. If he's been watching us, he might be a threat to others as well." As we made our way back to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The weight of the mystery still hung over us, and I knew we had to act quickly. We piled into the vehicle, the hum of the engine echoing in the stillness of the night. "Let's drive to the station," I said, glancing at Marissa and Mrs. Henderson. "We can't waste any time." The ride felt surreal, as if we were moving through a dream. The streets were quiet, shadows stretching across the pavement as the streetlights flickered above us. I could sense the tension in the air, the unease lingering like a ghost we couldn't quite shake off. When we arrived at the police station, my heart raced again, not from fear, but from the urgency of our mission. We entered the station, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and approached the front desk. A weary-looking officer glanced up from his paperwork, raising an eyebrow at us. "What can I do for you?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to reveal. "We have important information about a man who's been stalking us. He's been watching us for months, and we think he's connected to an old house on Maple Street." The officer's expression shifted, interest peaked. "Okay, what do you have?" I launched into the details, recounting the past few days, the strange occurrences, the unsettling feeling of being watched, and finally, our confrontation in the attic. As I spoke, I could see the officer's expression change, disbelief giving way to concern. "This is serious," he said, his tone shifting. "We'll need to investigate this further. Do you have any evidence?" I handed over Clara's diary, feeling the weight of it in my hands. This was found in the attic. It belonged to a girl named Clara. She wrote about being watched, and I think it might connect to our situation. The officer took the diary, flipping through the pages, and his eyes widened as he read. "We'll send a team to that house. It's been on our radar for some time, but we haven't had the resources to investigate it thoroughly. If there's someone in there, it could explain a lot. Do you think he'll come after us?" Marissa asked, her voice shaking. The officer hesitated, glancing at his partner before responding. "It's possible, but we'll increase patrols in your neighborhood. We need to take this seriously, and we'll keep you updated on any developments." After leaving the station, a heavy silence fell over the car. The gravity of the situation settled in as we drove back to my house. I glanced at Marissa and Mrs. Henderson, their faces pale but determined. "We did the right thing," I said, trying to reassure them. "We faced him, and now we're taking action. He can't keep watching us anymore." As we arrived home, the weight of the night's events pressed down on us, but there was a newfound sense of resolve. We had taken the first steps to reclaim our lives and confront the darkness that had invaded them. However, as I climbed into bed that night, exhaustion washed over me. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the unease that clung to me like a shroud. My mind raced with thoughts of the man, the diary, and the chilling feeling of being watched. Then, just as I was about to drift off, my phone buzzed beside me. Groggy and half asleep, I reached for it, expecting a text or a notification. Instead, I found a message from an unknown number. "You should have stayed away." My heart sank as a cold wave of dread washed over me. The feeling of being watched crashed back over me with renewed intensity, wrapping me in its suffocating grip. The message lingered in my mind, sending shivers down my spine. I sat up in bed, the weight of the world pressing down on me. My heart raced as I stared at the screen, the glow of the phone illuminating the darkness around me. "You should have stayed away." The words felt like a threat, a chilling reminder that the nightmare was far from over. I glanced at Marissa, who was asleep in the next room. I didn't want to alarm her, but I knew I couldn't ignore this. I needed to protect her and Mrs. Henderson, and I couldn't do that if I let fear paralyze me. I texted the unknown number, my fingers shaking as I typed. "Who is this?" My pulse quickened as I awaited a response, each second feeling like an eternity. I could hear the faint hum of the house settling around me, each creak and groan adding to the unease. The reply came almost instantly. "You'll find out soon enough." Panic surged through me, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I didn't know who I was dealing with, but I could sense the threat looming. The man who had been watching me was no longer a distant worry. He was right there, lingering in the shadows of my life. I decided to wake Marissa. She needed to know, and we had to stick together. I tiptoed into her room, the floorboards creaking under my weight. As I gently shook her shoulder, her eyes fluttered open, and confusion quickly turned to concern. "What's wrong?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "I just got a message from the stalker," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. He's still watching us. I think he's coming back. Marissa's face paled as she processed my words. What do we do? Should we call the police again? I nodded, but deep down, I knew that simply reporting it wouldn't be enough. Yes, but we should also prepare ourselves. We need to think strategically. If he's coming for us, we need to be ready. We both knew that facing him again wouldn't be easy, but the thought of being passive was even more terrifying. Let's wake Mrs. Henderson, I said. She should know what's happening. After a few moments, we gathered in the living room, our faces illuminated by the soft glow of a lamp. Mrs. Henderson appeared, her expression shifting from sleepiness to alarm as we explained the situation. What are we going to do? She asked, her voice trembling. We need to set up a plan, I replied. We can't let him take us by surprise again. Together, we brainstormed ideas, fueled by a mixture of fear and determination. We decided to keep all the lights on in the house, creating an aura of vigilance. We would take turns staying awake, monitoring the windows and doors, ready to confront whoever was lurking outside. As we fortified our defenses, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The night felt electric, every sound amplified, every shadow a potential threat. The fear that had previously paralyzed us now transformed into a protective instinct. We would not go down without a fight. Hours passed, and the oppressive silence hung heavily in the air. The moonlight spilled through the windows, casting eerie shapes on the walls. As the clock approached midnight, a tense stillness enveloped the room. Each of us remained on high alert, adrenaline coursing through our veins. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something, a flicker of movement outside. My heart raced as I leaned closer to the window, squinting into the darkness. A figure lingered at the edge of the yard, shrouded in shadows. Do you see him? I whispered urgently, nodding towards the window. Marissa and Mrs. Henderson turned their heads, their expressions a mix of fear and determination. We need to call the police now, Marissa urged, her voice steadying as she reached for her phone. Before she could dial, the figure stepped closer, revealing a dark silhouette. My heart thudded in my chest as I recognized the familiar shape, the same man from the attic. Stay back, I shouted, my voice slicing through the silence. We're not afraid of you. The man paused, his expression unreadable in the dim light. You should have left it alone, he said, his voice low and menacing. You have no idea what you're meddling with. Marissa clutched my arm, fear radiating from her. Call the police, she urged again, and this time I nodded, fumbling for my own phone. As I dialed, the man stepped closer, crossing the threshold of the yard. You think you can protect yourselves? You're too late, he sneered, his eyes glinting in the darkness. Stay away, I yelled again, desperation creeping into my voice. We know what you did. He laughed, a low, chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. You think you understand? You're just pawns in a game you can't comprehend. Suddenly, the tension broke as headlights pierced the darkness, illuminating the yard. The police arrived, sirens blaring, cutting through the night. The man's eyes widened, and in an instant, he turned and bolted into the shadows. Get down, I shouted, pushing Marissa and Mrs. Henderson behind me. I watched as officers leaped out of their cars, shouting commands into the darkness. The chase ensued, but the man was fast, darting through the trees and vanishing into the woods. I felt a surge of frustration, knowing he had slipped away again. As the officers searched the area, I could see the look of determination on their faces. We'll find him, one of the officers reassured me. He can't hide forever. The adrenaline slowly faded, replaced by a wave of exhaustion. I leaned against the wall, trying to process everything that had happened. The police stayed for a while, taking statements and gathering information. Eventually, they left, promising to keep a close watch on our neighborhood. As the door closed behind them, a heavy silence returned to the house, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. We did everything we could, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice soothing yet weary. We'll be okay. They'll catch him. But even as she spoke, doubt gnawed at me. Would he come back? Would we ever truly be safe? The unsettling feeling of being watched crept back, reminding me that the nightmare was far from over. As the night wore on, we gathered in the living room, a small group huddled together. We discussed what had happened, our voices barely above whispers, afraid to break the fragile peace. It was a night of uncertainty, but we stood united, ready to face whatever came next. As dawn approached, the first rays of sunlight crept through the windows, casting a warm glow over the room. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the night lift ever so slightly. The shadows that had haunted us were beginning to fade, but I knew the struggle was far from over. We would continue to fight, to stand together against the darkness. We had faced our fears, uncovered the truth, and now we would reclaim our lives, one step at a time. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video.